You're clear, Nico. Hurry, Gray whispered, casting a wary glance over his shoulder, ensuring no one was approaching. Two adolescent boys, huddled in front of a house door, seemed like a recipe for trouble. Just stay on guard, Gray. I've almost got it, his dark-haired companion hissed back, fingers deftly working on the doorknob. Gray watched with a hint of doubt as Nico fumbled with the hairpins he had stolen from one of the older girls. Are you sure you can open it? Picking locks, Nico said through gritted teeth, is a lot harder than that guy in the alleyway made it seem. Suddenly the doorknob clicked, and both pairs of eyes lit up. You did it, Gray exclaimed in a loud whisper. Bow down to my powers, Nico declared, holding a colorful hairpin triumphantly in the air. Gray playfully smacked him on the shoulder and gestured for silence. Nico swiftly stashed the hairpins back into his zippered pocket and nodded at Gray. Together, they tiptoed through the wooden door. Are you sure the owners are out today? Gray asked, scanning the meticulously furnished house. I scoped this place out last week. The husband and wife leave every week at this time and won't be back for at least an hour. We've got plenty of time to grab what we need, Nico reassured, already on the lookout for valuables to fill their bag. Letting out a deep breath, Gray reasoned to himself that it was necessary. Stealing from someone, no matter how affluent, didn't align with his morals, but he couldn't ignore what he overheard between the orphanage's headmaster and government officials. Though he only caught fragments of their conversation, it was evident that their orphanage faced imminent danger due to financial constraints. This should suffice, Nico affirmed with a nod, surveying the contents of the backpack they had brought along. Peering over Nico's shoulder, Gray inquired, What's our next move? How do we turn this into money? We can't exactly hand all this jewelry over to Headmaster Wilbeck. Way ahead of you, Nico smirked. I found a guy willing to pay cash for anything intriguing. And this guy is fine dealing with a couple of 12-year-olds? Gray questioned. He doesn't ask questions, I don't ask questions. Simple as that. Nico shrugged as they made their way to the door. Taking the back route toward the far end of the city, they blended in with the crowd of pedestrians walking along the cracked sidewalk. Keeping their heads low and strides brisk, they turned left into an alleyway. Navigating through piles of refuse and stacked boxes of unknown contents, they halted in front of a faded red door, shielded behind another gated metal barrier. We're here, Nico announced, gesturing towards the bag. Gray slid it off his shoulders and handed it over, while Nico knocked on the door in an unfamiliar rhythm. Slicking back his black hair and puffing his chest out, Nico coughed a few times and narrowed his eyes, attempting to exude an air of intimidation, though as intimidating as any scrawny 12-year-old could manage. After a brief pause, a wiry old man in a shabby suit emerged from behind the red door. He peered down at them through the metal gate with a scrutinizing gaze. Ah, the rather persistent child. I see you've brought a friend, he remarked, yet made no motion to unlock the gate. Nico cleared his throat once more and lowered his voice. I've brought some items you might find interesting, he said, his tone surprisingly deep and convincing. He opened the drawstring bag he held, offering the lanky, narrow-eyed man a glimpse of the stolen jewelry. Raising an eyebrow, the man released the lock on the gate, which emitted a shrill creak as it opened slightly. He scanned the surroundings before bending down to inspect the bag. Not a bad collection. Did you filch these from your mother, perhaps? No questions, remember? Nico reminded, cinching the bag closed. Can we discuss prices inside? The slender man cast another suspicious glance around before relenting and allowing them inside. Close the door behind you, he instructed. Upon stepping into the petite shop, they were enveloped in a thick haze of smoke. Across the room, two figures sat, each holding a lit cigarette, billowing clouds into the air. Despite the smoke obscuring their features, Gray could discern their general outlines. One was robust, muscles evident beneath a tank top. The other, though more rotund, possessed sturdy limbs indicating strength. Come along, children. Let's get this over with, the slender man urged, scratching his unshaven cheeks. Nico and Gray exchanged glances, Then Nico approached the counter while Gray lingered behind, scanning the assortment of books and gadgets on display. Among them, a thin, tattered book caught his attention. Judging by the few words visible on the spine, it appeared to be an old instructional manual on Kai. He carefully plucked it from the shelf, noting the torn front cover. His initial inclination was to return it. After all, the orphanage possessed books in far better condition concerning core development for Kai usage. Yet, his fingers seemed to act of their own accord as they flipped through the pages. Inside were illustrations and diagrams of various poses, accompanied by arrows and lines. He felt a desire to take it, even entertaining the thought of inquiring about its price. But he restrained himself. The book represented a luxury at a time when they needed funds to safeguard their home. Gray attempted to decipher the vague instructions in the book, but soon found himself losing interest. Instead, his gaze kept returning to the two men engaged in a game of cards at the folding table, periodically casting glances at Nico as he conducted business with the shop owner. Feeling uneasy, Gray buried his face in the old book, occasionally peeking out from behind its pages. Uncertain of the men's intentions, he wished to leave before finding out more. Fortunately, Nico concluded his transaction and joined Gray, briefly flashing a smile before adopting his usual stoic expression. "Find something interesting?" Nico inquired, noticing the book in Gray's hand. "It's nothing," Gray replied, placing the thin, coverless book back on the shelf. "You can take it if you want," the wiry shop owner interjected, leaning casually against the front counter. "No one knows how to read it, and it's just been gathering dust here." "Really?" Gray questioned, suspicion evident on his face. The shop owner's unnaturally white teeth gleamed in what could pass as a smile as he nodded in affirmation. Without another word, Gray swiftly stashed the book in the bag and muttered a quick thanks to the shop owner. Exiting the store, Nico unzipped his jacket and revealed a bundle of crumpled cash. "See? I told you it'd all work out," Nico grinned. "I suppose so," Gray replied, his skepticism lingering. Despite feeling remorseful for the couple they had stolen from, Gray consoled himself with the thought that they hadn't taken much jewelry. Nico had reasoned that a small number of missing items wouldn't necessarily prompt the couple to involve the authorities, especially considering their advanced age. The likelihood was that they would attribute the loss to forgetfulness or misplacement. As they made their way back to the orphanage, Gray breathed a sigh of relief. The further they distanced themselves from the scene of the theft, the more at ease he felt. "What was my purpose in all this, Nico?" Gray queried, navigating through the bustling street. "It seems like you handled everything on your own." "Hey, you got a free book out of it, right?" Nico nudged Gray with his shoulder. "Besides, it's more fun." "We're being followed," Gray whispered, cutting him off. He kept his eyes fixed straight ahead. Sensing the presence of two pairs of eyes practically drilling into his back since they left the shop, Gray hesitated to assume. But upon catching a glimpse of one of the men, he recognized him as one of the smokers from the store. They trailed behind, persistent even after 2 turns, leaving no room for doubt. "This way," Nico ordered in a subdued tone. Reaching the outskirts of the city, they veered right into an alleyway, utilizing a trash can to scale the locked fence. Gray landed gracefully on his feet, while Nico struggled to maintain his balance, clawing at the fence to steady himself as he toppled over. Racing down the dingy alley, reeking of a combination of rodent droppings and decay, the darkness enveloped them between towering buildings. Taking cover behind a sizable mound of trash, they waited, concealed from view. Soon the sound of 2 pairs of footsteps grew louder, drawing nearer. "Little rats made it easy for us," a hoarse voice chuckled. "A fitting grave for them," came the gravelly reply. Nico cautiously peered out for a glimpse. "It's the men from the shop," he muttered, swiftly retreating behind the trash heap. "I know," Gray replied, already scanning for potential weapons. "They're either here to reclaim the shop owner's money or pilfer it for themselves," Nico remarked, clutching the cash tightly. Suddenly, a dark figure vaulted over the opposite side of the trash pile, casting a looming shadow over them. Surprise! The burly thug exclaimed with a sinister grin. Run! Gray screamed at Nico, giving him a forceful shove. Without wasting a moment on a retort, Gray dashed down the narrow alleyway. The muscular man swung his hefty hand, prompting Gray to step back out of reach. Feeling the rush of air from the force of the swing, Gray swung the broken plank he had grabbed from the ground towards the man's ribs. The burly man staggered, more from surprise than pain. Seizing the opportunity, Gray made a dash towards Nico, who was being pursued by the round companion of the burly thug. However, before Gray could reach him, the man struck Nico to the ground, leaving him winded. Gasping for breath, Nico lay on the ground as the rotund thug raised his leg over him. "Over here, you brute!" Gray roared, hoping to divert the thug's attention. "What did you say?" the thug snarled, turning around to confront Gray. Gray bolted past the hefty thug just as the man lunged towards him, his pudgy fingers grasping at thin air. He might have been caught, but his muscular companion collided into him moments later, eliciting grunts from both men behind him. His mind raced, searching for potential escape routes in this seemingly hopeless situation. His eyes scanned the surroundings, and then he spotted a long, bent nail protruding from the brick wall of a nearby building, roughly 3 yards above the ground. Cursing softly, Gray feinted to his right as the muscular thug behind him made a grab. Evading the grasp without even glancing back, he leaped upwards, aiming to reach the nail. As his body propelled upwards, everything seemed to quiet down around him. It was as if the world had slowed, and amidst the stillness, he could hear the erratic thumping of his own heart, drowning out all other sounds. Behind him, Gray sensed the imminent threat of grasping hands ready to pull him down, yet he remained surprisingly composed. His peripheral vision sharpened, allowing him to take in the entirety of his surroundings in one glance. The muscular thug stumbled and crashed to the ground just behind him. Finding leverage by wedging his toe into a deep crack in one of the lower bricks, Gray propelled himself upwards, reaching for the rusted nail. The rough, cold texture of the iron nail greeted his fingers as he snatched it between his index and middle finger. Though not much of a weapon, it was better than nothing. As Gray dislodged the nail from the crumbling brick, he pushed off the wall with his feet, hurtling towards the hefty thug who had narrowly avoided tripping over his fallen companion and was closing in on him. Observing the man's expression shift from surprise to grim determination, he recognized the impending interception of his attack. Using his free hand, Gray vaulted off the hefty thug's right arm as it swung towards him. Simultaneously, he thrust the nail in his hand directly into the man's eye. He felt the sensation of iron piercing soft tissue, witnessing the shift in the man's expression from concentration to surprise, then to sheer agony. With a shrill howl, the world returned to its normal pace. Gray stumbled gracelessly into a pile of old boxes as his opponent frantically clawed at his face, too terrified to approach the nail lodged in his left eye. "Come on," Gray urged, pulling a stunned Nico back to his feet. Glancing back once more, he saw the muscular thug rushing to aid his friend. Without hesitation, they darted out of the alleyway, sprinting for their lives. Out of breath and drenched in sweat, Gray collapsed beside Nico behind a convenience store just outside the city. They leaned against the wall, too exhausted to worry about the unsanitary conditions. Nico tore off his jacket and lifted his shirt to cool down. "That's what you came for," he panted, slapping Gray's thigh. "Oh man, you should have seen yourself, Gray. You moved around like those knights in duels." Shaking his head, Gray struggled to catch his breath. "I don't know what happened. Everything just slowed down." "I knew you had it in you. Remember when Pavia dropped all those dishes next to you?" Nico prompted. "Yeah, why?" Gray replied. "You caught them. 3 plates and 2 bowls, Gray," Nico exclaimed. "And you hadn't even been paying attention." "I admit, that was an impressive catch, but it has nothing to do with fighting," Gray argued, sagging further down against the wall. "You'll realize soon," he replied, seeming too tired to argue. "Now let's go. I don't want to get extra chores for being out past sundown." Arriving at the old 2-story house that served as the orphanage just before dinner, Gray and Nico had ample time to freshen up and avoid suspicion by being punctual. Nico cautiously opened the back door, cringing at the squeak of the old hinge. Keeping the lights off, they crept down the unlit hallway. However, just before they could reach their rooms, the clear voice of the orphanage's headmaster called out from the living room. "Gray, Nico, can you come here for a moment?" she said, her voice quiet yet stern. Gray and Nico exchanged anxious glances. Quickly, Nico tossed his jacket and the drawstring bag into his room and shut the door behind him. "Do you think she already found out?" Gray whispered. "I'd normally say it'd be impossible, but it's the sorceress we're talking about," Nico replied, his typically confident demeanor overshadowed by dread. They entered the brightly lit living room, their clothes and faces dirty, their hair disheveled. Seated on the couch with perfect posture was Headmaster Wilbeck, known to them all as the sorceress. Beside her stood a girl of their age, with dusty brown hair cascading over her shoulders and a creamy complexion. She wore a luxurious red dress that seemed beyond their means, even with the money they had just acquired. The headmaster regarded them with a raised brow, but didn't question their untidy state. They approached cautiously, and when the brown-haired girl lifted her gaze to meet Gray's, he shivered at her cold, emotionless eyes. "Gray, Nico." The headmaster nudged the girl softly. "I'd like you two to meet Cecilia. You three are the same age, so I hope you can show her around and become friends." Art's eyes fluttered open as if he had just blinked, yet it felt like he had been sleeping for days. Sitting up in his bed, a mixture of emotions burdened his shoulders. Why was this memory resurfacing after such a long time? Guilt twisted inside him at the thought of Nico and Cecilia. "Is everything all right?" Sylvie's voice came from the foot of his bed, where she was curled up in her miniature form. "Yeah, I'm fine," he replied, a lie slipping easily from his lips as he ran his fingers through his long, messy hair, now past his chin. The dream had been so vivid, transporting him back to Earth, reliving his previous life. He lay there, dazed and unable to shake off the feeling, until a knock sounded at his door. "Come in," Art called out, anticipating either his parents or his sister. Instead, a man in his late 20s entered, dressed in black clothes beneath thin leather armor typical of scouts. With a respectful bow, he relayed his message. "The location for the meeting with the Alacrian messenger has been decided, sir," the messenger stated. "Commander Virion has asked me to request that you prepare to meet with the messenger with him and Lord Aldir." "Got it. I'll be out in 10 minutes, he replied, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. "Shall I send over a maid to help you get ready?" the messenger asked. Art shook his head. "No need." "Very well." With another bow, the messenger left, closing the door behind him. Quickly, he washed up and tied his hair back at the crown of his head, leaving his bangs to fall just past his forehead. He dressed in a fine white tunic, trimmed with gold, to complement the dark mantle he wore over it. Properly clothed, with his hair pulled back neatly, he looked like a very dashing noble. His dream was still fresh in his mind, bringing with it a flood of memories from that life. Even the clothes were so very different. The pants in this world were incredibly tight, by comparison, but he had to admit, they offered great mobility and freedom when fighting. "A dapper appearance for one about to fight in a war," Virion remarked as he approached them alongside Alder. "Thanks," Art said with a wink, smoothing his sleeve. Aldir's clothing practically glowed with all the gold and gems decorating it, while Virion wore a simple black robe, still in mourning after Director Cynthia's murder. It had only been a few days, but Virion appeared to have aged a century. The signature black metal spike found jutting out of Cynthia's chest indicated that the assassination had been carried out by someone with the powers of the Vritra clan. It was unlikely that an actual clan member had performed the attack, as that would have jeopardized the No Ashura agreement in the war. However, it didn't rule out the possibility of one of their descendants being responsible. The question that ate at Art's mind and Virion's was how they had done it. According to the guards and the nurse caring for her, nobody had seen anyone leave or enter the floor Director Goodsky had been housed on. The door, which had been closed and locked, hadn't been tampered with either. Everything remained a mystery, except one fact. that somehow the Vritra clan was involved. "The ships are about a day away from our shore, Arthur. Are you ready to meet this representative?" Virian asked. "I am, but are you ready?" Art responded, genuinely concerned. "You're not going to kill the messenger, right?" With a faint smile, Tessia's grandfather shook his head. Aldir stepped toward the glowing teleportation gate. "Good, then let us depart." Memories he thought he had forgotten flashed in Art's head with every blink, the scenes haunting him in broad daylight as they prepared to make their way to the location designated to meet with the messenger. "Are you okay, Arthur?" Sylvie's concern touched his mind. "I'm fine, Sylv," he replied, scratching her small ears, "though I'm still getting used to the fact that you call me by my name now." "Grandfather said it's important that I uphold the dignity of the dragons," Sylvie stated, holding her tiny snout up high, sauntering beside him as they exited the teleportation gate Aldir had conjured. It had brought them to a small clearing on a rise just above a remote fishing town called Slore, more than a dozen miles south of Atiston. "Well, I can't say you weren't cuter before when you called me Papa," Art smirked. "Don't worry, I still see you as my papa." Sylvie rubbed her side against Art's leg while they walked, as if to comfort him. The occasional moist breeze carried with it a strong smell of the sea, and Art felt sticky despite the frigid air. "I still don't feel right about having this meeting without any backup," Virian said warily. "If this messenger has the audacity to act against us, I will have every right to intervene," Aldir assured the commander, one corner of his mouth twitching up in the barest hint of a smile. Though two of his eyes were closed, the third, a single vivid purple eye, stared down the path ahead, ever watchful. "Considering everything the Vritra have done, breeding Asura half-bloods, turning our mana beasts into mutants, and now the ships, I can't imagine how long Agrona has been planning this. Despite the extensive preparation, though, I can't shake the feeling that this war is just some sort of game to him. The choices he's made, the risks he's taken." Commander Virian trailed off, shaking his head. "If Agrona were easy to predict, he never would have gotten this far," Aldir acknowledged reluctantly. "Since he, like all the other Asuras residing in this world, is prohibited from directly participating in the war, he's been coming up with ways to work around that by being the almighty hand that moves the chess pieces, at least for his side." "And who is the almighty hand moving the pieces for our side?" Virian asked with a raised brow. "You are the one leading this war, are you not?" Aldir retorted. Virian shrugged. "That's what I tell myself at night." "All right," Art interrupted. "Is this the meeting place?" "Of course not," Virian said with a weary sigh, tying back his long white hair. "This is the farthest I can take us. From here we'll travel to our real destination." Aldir clarified. "It's in the middle of the ocean." "Lead the way," Art said. A milky aura surrounded both Aldir and Virian as their feet slowly rose from the ground. After a moment, the aura lifted Virian into the air as well. Virian's lips shut tight, and he curled in on himself slightly, like a cat picked up by its scruff. As the two of them picked up speed, swiftly ascending above the clouds, Sylvie scampered towards the edge of the cliff. "Jump!" Sylvie chirped, then leapt off. Without a second thought, Art followed his bond. Propelling himself up and over the steep edge, he took a moment to admire the bird's-eye view of the bustling town directly below him. Just as he began to fall, Sylvie's massive figure appeared below, scooping him up from the air with a snap of her powerful wings. Art patted the base of her long black neck as they sped through the clouds. "Sylvie, have you gained weight?" Art joked. "That joke is getting old, you know," Sylvie grumbled. "Not to me." Art let out a refreshing whoop at the top of his lungs, the sound carried away by the harsh wind slicing against them as they gathered speed. He spotted the tiny figures of Aldir and Virian ahead of them. Sylvie caught up to them, but stayed a few dozen yards behind Aldir as they surfed along the top of the clouds. This far up in the sky, the only sound was the sharp whistle of air around them, making the journey peaceful despite the purpose of their trip. As Art stared in a daze at the blue and white of their surroundings, his mind wandered back to that day in Epheotus after he had finished his training. The brusque king of the Asuras had wanted to see him before he headed back to Dicathan. It was the second encounter he'd had with Lord Indrath, and also the moment he realized who Meyer was. The elderly Asura, who had healed him and taught him how to read spells using Realm Heart, had been seated next to the stone-faced Lord Indrath, an amused grin on her now youthful face. He'd stood there speechless, his mouth ajar, until Lord Indrath beckoned him forward, saying simply, "I'm sure you remember my wife, Meyer." Needless to say, the meeting hadn't gone as he had thought it would. For one, Lord Indrath had been much less critical this time compared to the first time they had met. He'd even barely acknowledged Art's improvement, although he had added that if it weren't for Meyer's help, he would have been a lost cause. Before departing, Lord Indrath had given Art one piece of advice. Oddly, he activated his ether ability, freezing time for everyone present, even his wife, except for the two of them. Art stared blankly at the king of the Asuras as Meyer, Sylvie, and the guards remained static, and he left Art with a cryptic message. "It's wisest to close your heart to the elf princess." That was all he had said before, withdrawing his powers and having the guards escort Sylvie and Art back to Winsome and Wren, who were waiting for them outside. "We're almost here," Sylvie announced, snapping Art back to the present. Aldir and Virion had stopped above the clouds, waiting for Art and Sylvie to catch up. "I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but I will anyway. No one knows how much the Vritra actually know, so it'd be wise to keep your true strength hidden during this meeting." Aldir's voice tickled uncomfortably in Art's ear, as if he was whispering right next to him. "What about Sylvie?" Art shouted over the sound of the Asura's dragon wings beating at the air. "Lady Sylvie will have to transform back into her miniature form," Aldir answered. "I will carry you down, Arthur. I'll lay low for now, but I'm not going to stay hidden during the war. If I want to protect you, I'll do so with you on my back," Sylvie declared as she turned into her white fox form. Art began free-falling, but Aldir dipped underneath Sylvie and him, wrapping them in the same aura that enveloped Virion. They descended beneath the layer of clouds below them, plummeting through the blanket of white, the moisture in the air dampening their clothes, until they spotted the shimmering ocean gently rippling in all directions. Despite the phenomenal view of the never-ending stretch of water, his gaze instantly focused on the dark specks littered across the ocean to his right. A few dozen miles north, he could see the fleet of Alacrian ships heading toward the shore near Edistin City, the capital of Sapin. "Look there," Sylvie pointed out. Floating on the water below was a pitch-black platform about the size of a small house. As they descended, moments behind Virion and Aldir, he could make out two small figures. From a distance, they blended in with the platform they stood on. A shiver ran down his spine. Every hair on his body stood on end, and he could feel his heart beating faster the closer they drifted toward the platform. "They're there," Art said aloud to no one in particular. "But I don't think they're ordinary messengers." Making a soft landing onto the platform, the three of them walked toward the center, with Sylvie following behind Art. His jaws clenched at the sight of the two supposed messengers. By their familiar pale gray skin tone and striking red eyes, he knew they had to be part of the Vritra clan. "Welcome to our humble abode," the taller of the two sneered, his lanky arms spread wide. Virion narrowed his eyes. "We assumed we'd be meeting with a messenger. That role seems to be beneath both of you." "I'm flattered, but at this moment we are mere messengers," he replied with an exaggerated smile. His companion remained silent. Examining the two Vritra, despite their ancestry and blood, they couldn't be more different. The one on Art's left stood just a bit taller than him with a ramrod straight posture. He had deep-set eyes underneath heavy lids, giving a mysteriously charming quality to his stern face. With his neatly cropped head of ash-black hair and his tight-fitting black armor underneath a lavish purple cape, the Vritra would have looked like something out of every woman's dreams if it weren't for the pair of horns jutting out just above his ears. The other Vritra, the one who had been talking, stood well over 6 feet tall, towering over them all, despite his hunched posture. His long, thin arms dangled by his sides as if they had popped out of their sockets. This Vritra didn't wear armor. Instead, his body was wrapped completely in thick, dark bandages underneath a shabby black mantle that hung from his shoulders. Messy bangs peeked out from underneath his tattered hood, accentuating his peculiar appearance. This was the first time Art had come face to face with a Vritra, so he was surprised to see how much smaller the horns of the purple-caped Vritra were compared to the one that had attacked Sylvia in the cave during his childhood. But he couldn't sense the level of either of these messengers, which could have meant they were purposely hiding their auras, or simply that they were that much stronger than he was. "I am Silrit, and this is Uto. It is an honor to meet you, Aldir. We retainers have heard much about the famous Asuras in Ephiodus." Silrit's gaze locked onto Aldir's as if Virion and Art didn't even exist, but it wasn't out of respect. "I trust that you will uphold the pact and remain a non-combatant?" Art was surprised at how casually he had mentioned that he was a retainer. That meant he was one of the leading figures in this war who were actually allowed to fight, just beneath the 4 scythes. "Assuming your side will do the same?" "Yes," Aldir answered, his stare just as piercing as Silrit's. "That's a shame. I wanted to try fighting an Asura, but I guess I'll have to settle for slaughtering a few thousand of you lessers," Uto spat, glaring at Art. The lanky Vritra took a step toward him, craning his neck down with a sneer. "I get why Mr. One-Eye and Grandpa Elf are here, but I didn't expect the boy wonder, Arthur Leywin, to grace us with his presence." Art wasn't sure how the Vritra had heard of him, but he maintained his cool facade. "I could say the same for you. To what do we owe the pleasure of the retainers showing their faces here?" "Like Silrit said, we are here as messengers. We didn't want to give you the opportunity to capture and torture an innocent messenger for information, because that's what I'd do." Uto's slanted red eyes peered into Art's, searching for signs of fear or anger. Instead, Art returned his provocation with a nonchalant smirk. "I can't wait to find you on the battlefield." He replied with a murderous gaze, his lips spreading into a wicked grin. "Why wait? I love slicing through children's flesh the most." "Uto, enough," Silrit reprimanded him. "What?" Uto shrugged innocently. "Mr. One-Eye here can't touch us anyway." "Nor would I want to touch any filthy Lesherans," Aldir answered calmly, holding the lanky Vritra's gaze. "Now, since we didn't come here to exchange frivolities, get on with your message and disappear from my sight." By the slight twitch in Uto's brows, Art could tell he was annoyed that his attempt at provoking Aldir had backfired. However, before he had the chance to respond, Silrit stretched out an arm to restrain him. "The message that His Majesty has tasked me to deliver to the leaders of Dicathan is simply this: surrender the ruling families, and mercy will be given to those who deserve it. Continue resistance, and our army will eradicate everyone on this continent without discretion," Silrit recited, still looking only at Aldir. "You call those terms?" Virion burst out. "That's a one-sided ultimatum." Uto bent down to be at eye level with Virion. "Be thankful you even have the choice. Don't worry. If you decide on the first option, I promise to be extra gentle when slicing off your head." Silrit stared daggers at his companion. "We weren't sent here to incite a fight, Uto." "That was never my intention. Just a friendly warning about the upcoming battle," the lanky Vritra replied. But then he turned back to Virion with a perverse grin. "I hope to meet you again, Elf King. You and your granddaughter. I'll make sure to enjoy myself thoroughly while you watch." Disregarding Aldir's warning, Art stepped forward, ready to draw the sword in his dimension ring, but Virion moved first. In a flash, his fist made contact with Uto's jaw. Tessia's grandfather had already activated his second phase, a shroud of black covering his entire body and head, but Art could still make out the rage in his eyes. Uto's head immediately snapped back at the blow, lifting him off the ground and knocking loose the hood that had been covering his head. "That kinda tickled," the lanky Vritra growled, cracking his neck. Uto's nose jutted out at a weird angle, but Art's eyes were glued to his horns. It wasn't the shape or the size of his horns that stunned him. No, it was the familiar chip on his left horn, the chip that the lance Aaliyah had made in the battle that cost her her life. The haunting images of Alea's bloody corpse, her limbs brutally severed and core destroyed, flooded Art's mind as he stared at the chip in Uto's left horn. Any form of inhibition that had kept him from killing the Vritra disappeared as he advanced toward him. "Was it you?" Art asked, his voice dripping with malice. Sylvie's concern seeped into his head from behind, but it was no use. With each step forward, the self-control that had enabled Art to remain neutral during this meeting faded. Mana surged from his body like a storm, shocking the Vritra and snapping Virion from his outrage. "Were you the one who killed Aaliyah?" Art took another step. "What was that, pup?" Uto snapped, his eyebrows furrowed with impatience. "The lance in the dungeon who had all her limbs cut off before dying," Art clarified, his voice icy. "Was it you?" "Ah," the Vritra said, his lips curling upward. Just from the tone of his voice, Art already knew the answer. Taunting Virion and using his granddaughter as ammunition was one thing, but the fact that he was the one responsible for Aaliyah's horrible torture and death now gave gravity to his threats. He had to die. "That pretty little elf? What if it was me, brat?" Uto spat. Art opened his mouth to respond, but Aldir gave him no chance to act on his impulse. He moved in front of him with a stern gaze. "This is what he wants you to do. Don't let him provoke you." Art let out a deep breath. Of course he knew Uto was provoking them on purpose. Anyone with half a brain could see that. As for whether it was with forethought or because he was just that impulsive, he had a feeling it was both. Swallowing the bitter taste in his mouth, Art ignored Uto. Facing Silrit, he asked, "Was there anything else that needed to be discussed? Or was that predictable threat all you came here to say?" "You will be given 2 days to decide," Silrit answered callously. "If the royal families of Dicathin have not been surrendered by then, we will take that as your answer." Art looked back at Virion, who had finally gathered himself. "We'll show ourselves out." Virion's words were clipped as he glared at the Vritra, but he smoothed over the creases on his robe casually. As Art turned to leave with Virion and Aldir, Uto's voice rang out. "You should have heard her scream," he laughed. "Almost made me want to not kill her, keep her alive so I could keep making her scream, you know?" Art could feel his blood flowing faster, pounding in his head as he stepped toward the edge of the platform. Aldir caught his gaze and prepared to lift him up with his aura, but Art stopped him. Sending ice, lightning, and wind attribute mana into his palm, he raised his arm and whipped around to face Uto. The thin, translucent beam of fused elements pierced the narrow gap between the two Vritra, creating a crackling gale in its path. The ray shot past them and into the water, and the ocean split from the force of Art's spell. The waves instantly froze over, then a current of electricity shattered the ice into shards of sparkling glass. Art could see Uto's expression crumple, slowly giving way to one of doubt and shock. Even Silrit's cold face showed surprise as the shower of ice shards rained down on them. "Whether or not we decide to proceed with the war, I really hope to meet you again, Uto," Art said, turning his back on him as the shadowy platform they had been standing on convulsed. haunting images of Alea's bloody corpse, her limbs brutally severed and core destroyed, flooded Art's mind as he stared at the chip in Uto's left horn. Any form of inhibition that had kept him from killing the Vritra disappeared as he advanced toward him. "Was it you?" Art asked, his voice dripping with malice. Sylvie's concern seeped into his head from behind, but it was no use. With each step forward, the self-control that had enabled Art to remain neutral during this meeting faded. Mana surged from his body like a storm, shocking the Vritra and snapping Virion from his outrage. "Were you the one who killed Alea?" Art took another step. "What was that, pup?" Uto snapped, his eyebrows furrowed with impatience. "The lance in the dungeon who had all her limbs cut off before dying," Art clarified, his voice icy. "Was it you?" "Ah," the Vritra said, his lips curling upward. Just from the tone of his voice, Art already knew the answer. Taunting Virion and using his granddaughter as ammunition was one thing, but the fact that he was the one responsible for Alea's horrible torture and death now gave gravity to his threats. He had to die. "That pretty little elf? What if it was me, brat?" Uto spat. Art opened his mouth to respond, but Aldir gave him no chance to act on his impulse. He moved in front of him with a stern gaze. "This is what he wants you to do. Don't let him provoke you." Art let out a deep breath. Of course he knew Uto was provoking them on purpose. Anyone with half a brain could see that. As for whether it was with forethought or because he was just that impulsive, he had a feeling it was both. Swallowing the bitter taste in his mouth, Art ignored Uto. Facing Silrit, he asked, "Was there anything else that needed to be discussed? Or was that predictable threat all you came here to say?" "You will be given 2 days to decide," Silrit answered callously. "If the royal families of Dicathan have not been surrendered by then, we will take that as your answer." Art looked back at Virion, who had finally gathered himself. "We'll show ourselves out." Virion's words were clipped as he glared at the Vritra, but he smoothed over the creases on his robe casually. As Art turned to leave with Virion and Aldir, Uto's voice rang out. "You should have heard her scream," he laughed. "Almost made me want to not kill her, keep her alive so I could keep making her scream, you know?" Art could feel his blood flowing faster, pounding in his head as he stepped toward the edge of the platform. Aldir caught his gaze and prepared to lift him up with his aura, but Art stopped him. Sending ice, lightning, and wind attribute mana into his palm, he raised his arm and whipped around to face Uto. The thin, translucent beam of fused elements pierced the narrow gap between the two Vritra, creating a crackling gale in its path. The ray shot past them and into the water, and the ocean split from the force of Art's spell. The waves instantly froze over, then a current of electricity shattered the ice into shards of sparkling glass. Art could see Uto's expression crumple, slowly giving way to one of doubt and shock. Even Silrit's cold face showed surprise as the shower of ice shards rained down on them. "Whether or not we decide to proceed with the war, I really hope to meet you again, Uto," Art said, turning his back on him as the shadowy platform they had been standing on convulsed. Aldir lifted Virion, Sylvie, and Art into the air, and Art fought the urge to turn back around. Staring at Virion's face, lined with worry and frustration, he could tell Virion was thinking about the Vritra's words. "You're not really considering their offer, right?" Art asked as they rose above the clouds. "No, but if they were to keep their word, imagine how many innocent lives could be saved," Virion said, the creases between his brows thickening. Art scoffed. "That's a big if to be sacrificing your and your family's lives for." "Arthur's right," Aldir chimed in. "You know what becomes of the world under the Vritra's rule. Even Ephiotis won't be safe from harm if Agrona is able to populate 2 continents with his half-breed descendants. It'll be only a matter of a few generations before they strike against the rest of the Asuras as well." "I know," Virion sighed. "I'm not looking forward to the protests that will undoubtedly greet my choice, though." "You're going to tell everyone?" Art asked, surprised. Tessa's grandfather nodded solemnly. "Trust is a fickle serpent, laboriously gained yet so easily lost. A leader must be trusted by his people, But how much do you think they'll trust me after realizing I'm basically using their lives as a gambling token? Not much, Art admitted, still reluctant toward the idea. He wouldn't question Virian's decisions, though. As far as leadership went, he had much more experience than him, even with both lives under his belt. Art could have offered a different perspective, but ultimately he trusted Virian's choices, as did Aldir. When the Asura had first come to Dicathan, killing the Grey Sunders in one sweep as soon as he had arrived, Art had assumed he would try to control Virian like some sort of puppeteer in the background. However, Aldir simply protected and advised Virian, never forcing him to take action. This said a lot about the Asura's respect for him. As they flew back to the western shore, Virian used a mental transmission artifact to coordinate the arrangements for the public appearance that would supposedly take place tomorrow. From the bits and pieces Art managed to pick up as Virian murmured into the artifact, it seemed all the major figures in the war would be present at the speech. The lances, the royal members of the three races, and other influential noble families were to be gathered and stand beside Virian as a sign of respect while he made his speech. They emerged through the teleportation gate and into the circular room in the castle just a few hours later. Before departing the bland brick chamber, Virian gave Art a reassuring pat on the back. "Get some rest, Arthur. Lord Aldir and I will handle the rest from here," the white-haired elf said with a tired smile. "I can help," Art protested. "There's a lot you need to plan if the announcement is to be made tomorrow, right?" "Let me worry about that," Virian countered. "Your family is here right now, waiting for you. After the true war begins, I'm afraid the amount of time you will be able to spend with your loved ones will be limited." "Listen to Virian," Aldir agreed. "Judging by your little parting gift to those Lesserans, you've prepared your body. Now, use this time to prepare your mind and heart." Feeling tired and dirty from the journey, Art relented, and they went their separate ways. He made his way towards the living quarters situated on the upper floors. With the castle always shrouded by clouds, it was hard to imagine how large this floating structure must be to accommodate almost 100 people while still having space for luxurious amenities. As he walked up the stairs with Sylvie silently scampering behind him, Art pondered how everyone's lives would change during this war. Until now, the battles had been isolated, taking place well past the Grand Mountains and never reaching civilization. There hadn't been any civilian casualties, only military ones. But once the ships landed on the western border, that would all change. And for the civilians, it would come as an unpleasant surprise. Art feared how the inhabitants, the non-nobles, would take Virian's announcement. At best, they would reluctantly accept the news. More likely, protests would arise, and it was even possible that the citizens the soldiers of Dicathan were trying to protect would betray them for the blind hope that the Alacrian forces would let them live if they cooperated. Exiting the stairway on the 4th floor, Art made his way down the wide corridor, warmly lit by orbs mounted on both walls. Narrower hallways branched off, with doors every few yards or so. "How do you suppose we find our parents, Sylv?" Art asked, veering right into a random hallway in hopes of running into someone who would know. "Searching for mana signatures seems over the top here and would probably alarm some of the mages," Sylvie chirped. "How about knocking on every door until we find someone who can tell us?" Art took another right at random and kept walking until a familiar sight caught his eye. A wide archway led to a patio garden outside the castle. He never thought he'd see such an open deck on a flying castle, but the vast orange sky of a beautiful sunset, dimmed by the transparent barrier surrounding it, illuminated the area. Playing on the neatly kept grass lawn were groups of children, some sparring with friends, others simply chasing each other. What made him stop, though, was the towering dark brown bear playing amidst the scampering children. He spotted an uncomfortable Ellie just beside her bond, talking to a blonde-haired boy about her age. With his chest puffed out, chin held high, and a smile that failed to reach his eyes, it seemed like he was attempting to flirt with Art's precious sister. "Sick him, Sylv. Make him scream like a castrato," Art said with an evil grin. His fierce bond Sylvie scampered towards his sister, sending a mental message asking what a castrato was. Meanwhile, Ellie's mana beast, Boo, picked up the blonde boy by the back of his collar and flung him away. Art locked eyes with Boo for a brief moment, giving him a stern but approving nod as he raised his right thumb. Still seated next to his sister, Boo responded with a furry thumbs up as well. In that moment, Art decided Boo wouldn't be such a bad companion for his sister after all. "Sylvie?" Ellie exclaimed as she spotted the little white fox scampering towards her. Her face lit up when she saw Art. "Brother?" The children, all nobles seeking refuge, turned their heads in unison, dropping whatever they had been occupied with. Some of the parents, seated nearby on patio chairs engaged in conversation, also turned to look at Art. Walking towards his sister, Art felt the weight of everyone's gaze upon him. Ellie scooped up Sylvie and embraced her tightly before looking back up at Art. "Brother, you're back already?" "Yup," Art replied with a smile, glancing around at the curious onlookers. He hugged his sister in greeting, whispering into her ear, "Why are they all staring at me?" "There's not a noble in Dickathan who doesn't know who Arthur Leywin is," she giggled. "You should see how those nobles treat me." "So that's what it was. I thought I had done something wrong to your friends here." Art chuckled in relief. Turning to Boo, who remained seated on his hind legs, he raised his hand. "Good to see you, Boo." The giant mana beast responded with a low grunt and accepted Art's hand with a large paw. "When did you two get so close?" Ellie marveled. "Men with common objectives tend to bond fast," Art answered, as Boo and he nodded at each other once more. "What? No, never mind. That's not important," Ellie amended, shaking her head. "It's good that you're here right now. You've got to stop them." "What? Stop who from what?" Art could hear the worry in her voice. Ellie pulled him inside, off the patio, and away from the other children and parents. Her eyes darted nervously left and right. "It's Mom and Dad," she said solemnly. "They've decided to join the war." Leaving Sylvie with his sister, Art made his way to his parents' room. He strode down the corridor, his gait growing faster with each step as he arrived in front of the door labeled Leywin Family. He took a deep breath to steady his nerves. The thought of what Ellie had said, that his parents really planned to take part in the war, filled him with unease. A dull thud resounded as he knocked on the wooden door. "It's open," the warm voice of his mother chimed from the other side. The hinges creaked as Art turned the knob and slid the door open. Bags lay open on the floor with clothes folded neatly beside them. He stepped inside, looking around to see his father polishing his gauntlets with a set of chainmail armor spread out beside him. His mother, who had been walking toward the door to greet their visitor, stopped when she saw him. She masked her surprise with a weak smile, and his father dropped his gaze as soon as he saw Art's expression. "So it's true," Art muttered, picking up a polished shin brace from beside his father. "Son," his father said, putting down the gauntlet and rag but remaining seated. "We weren't expecting you back so soon," his mother added, taking another step toward him. "Were you planning on leaving without saying anything to me?" Art asked, his gaze still focused on the shin brace in his hand. "Of course not. But we wanted to finish preparing before you got back," his mother said, lifting her hand, hesitating just a bit before she placed it on his shoulder. A mixture of feelings welled up in Art as he squeezed tightly at the metal armor, confusion as to why they had suddenly decided to fight, irritation that they hadn't even bothered to discuss this decision with him, and anger that they'd be willing to risk their lives when Ellie was so young, barely 12. Finally lifting his gaze from the armor in his hand, Art looked at his father. "I thought you were both going to wait until Ellie was older before joining the war." "Commander Virion advised us to stay until Ellie was older, or until you came," his father said, his gaze firm. "I don't believe you suddenly decided to fight just because I came back," Art replied doubtfully. "We didn't," his mother answered, her hand squeezing his shoulder more tightly. "I just got a transmission from Helen." His father stood up, his gaze unusually hard as he tested out his gauntlets. They were attacked in a dungeon as everyone was leaving. They stayed back to buy some time for the younger soldiers to escape, but, Art echoed, His father, Reynolds Leywin, the man who had always endured every hardship with an optimistic smile, looked up with an icy venom in his eyes. Adam didn't make it. No. Art shook his head. That's impossible. I was there just yesterday. I was the one who cleared the dungeon and killed the mutant holed up inside. His father nodded solemnly. Apparently after you left, as everyone prepared to depart, another horde of mana beasts, led by a mutant, attacked them. Helen thinks the bottom floor of the first dungeon was connected to another dungeon. The fight was a mess. No one had been expecting a battle, his mother said. The Twin Horns and some other veteran soldiers stayed to give everyone else time to get away. Luckily, the mutant was only B class, but because its army was larger and caught them off guard, there were more deaths than anyone expected, including Adam's. A barren silence lingered in the room after his mother finished speaking. He couldn't believe that someone he had just seen yesterday was dead. Then a sinking realization made him bolt upright. Tess had been in that dungeon. Who else died? He asked. Despite his worry, he didn't want to seem insensitive of Adam's death by asking if Tess was okay. That was all I was able to get from Helen. It was an emergency transmission, so the message was short. But she didn't name anyone else, so I figure the others who died were soldiers we don't know, his father said, letting out a slow, weary breath. Commander Virion probably knows more about the situation than we do. Surely Helen would have mentioned if something had happened to Tess, but he was still uneasy, to say the least. I'm sorry about Adam, Art said, trying to console his father. Adam wasn't his favorite of the Twin Horns. He had found his quick temper and cynical sarcasm to be distasteful, but he had been loyal. Underneath his impatient and cranky exterior had been a trustworthy comrade who stood by his parents' sides when they had been members of the party. He could see now why the atmosphere surrounding his father was so heavy. Don't misunderstand, Arthur. We're not doing this out of guilt. A soldier's life is always in danger, his father said. Even so, Art said, shaking his head. He knew he was being unreasonable. His father had every right to fight the battles he chose, but it was his own selfishness, wanting to keep the ones he loved safe, that made him want to try. It didn't matter what level your core was, or how knowledgeable you were about mana manipulation. No matter how much you strengthened your body, or heavily you equipped yourself, death could come at any moment in a battle. No matter how strong he became, he firmly believed that. Yet his father was willing to risk his and his mother's lives when it was not only unnecessary, but reckless. Arthur, it's not his fault, his mother consoled him. I'm the one who wants to go back to the Twin Horns and help out in the war. What? Art blurted, completely taken by surprise. You want to go to war? She nodded. Yes. But you can't. He turned to his father, certain his bewilderment was written on his face. I mean, Dad said you avoid using magic because something happened in the past. Why now? His mother cast a glance at his father, who dipped his head in a solemn nod. Arthur, sit down. He obeyed, taking a seat at the foot of the bed as his mother gathered her thoughts. What else did your father tell you? She eyed him guiltily as she tripped over her words, but he didn't take it to heart. She had told him she would need time to accept the revelations about who he was. It was clear that she was still conflicted, but he could tell she was trying. That was about all, he said. He said you would tell me the rest when you were ready. What we never told you about the Twin Horns, Arthur, was that there was actually one more member. Art's brows furrowed as he glanced over at his father, who remained silent. Her name was Lensa. She was a talented young augmenter, his mother continued. She recounted the story of a very bright and hopeful mage who had joined the Twin Horns shortly after his father had brought in a young Alice from Valden City. Her eyes glazed over as she described how she and Lensa had hit it off immediately, Lensa's brash nature and straightforwardness meshing well with his mother's timidity. Lensa had done well for herself as an adventurer even without the help of a party, and she was already fairly well known. So when she had asked the Twin Horns if she could join their party, it came as a surprise to everyone. His mother closed her eyes and paused for a breath. It was only about 2 years after she joined that the accident occurred. Art tensed in apprehension as he imagined what sort of accident had transpired, but his mother faintly smiled. It wasn't some dramatic calamity that befell us. Not everyone's life is as exciting as yours. Embarrassed, Art laughed uncomfortably and scratched his cheek. We got careless and ran into an ambush by a pack of stingers. None of us had sustained any major injuries, and I thought very little of it. I healed everyone's surface wounds. His mother pursed her lips to keep from crying. The thing about being an emitter is that everyone expects you to know how to heal every injury, that your magic is a one-spell cures-all when that really isn't the case. His father placed a consoling hand on his mother's back as she shuddered. I didn't know that either at the time. It hadn't been that long since I had awakened, and I'd never fully trained in the different aspects of healing. I didn't think I needed to. Wiping away her tears, she looked up with red eyes. I closed everyone's wounds, but the venom from the stingers' tails had infected the flesh below. Everyone else, including your father, was able to get treated in time before it could do any serious harm, but Lensa's wound was close to her mana core, and although I closed her wounds, the venom spread. Art drew in a breath sharply. Then, yes, her mana core got infected to the point where she could no longer practice mana manipulation. I had robbed my friend and teammate of the one true joy in her life. At least she survived, Art said, trying to comfort her, but she shook her head. She went off into a dungeon by herself and never came back out, Art's mother said. She had always said she wanted to die gloriously in battle, but she went into a high-risk dungeon knowing she couldn't use magic. She wanted to get herself killed. And you know what the funny part is? His mother looked up, trying to keep the tears from falling as she laughed bitterly. If I hadn't closed the wound, the doctor would have been able to extract the poison easily. She probably would have been fine if I hadn't healed her. Art opened his mouth, hoping words would form, but none did. His father remained silent as well, his hand still gently stroking his mother's back. After a few minutes, Art's mother composed herself. I've been scared to properly use magic for anything more than minor injuries since then. When we were attacked on our way to Xyrus, I was barely able to bring myself to heal your father. But after you told us about your secret and went off to train, while we were holed up in that cave, Elder Rinia helped me. I doubt Adam's death was a sign, but after everything the Twin Horns have done for your father and me, I think it's time for us to be there for them. The resolution in Art's mother's eyes made it clear that she wasn't saying this to gain his approval. That's not the only reason, though, his father said in a hushed tone. Now that you're back, it's been killing me to think about you fighting in the war while we're here, safely twiddling our thumbs and waiting for good news. But what if something happens to either of you? What will happen to Ellie? Art argued, still uneasy about them going into battle. You could... He cut off, unable to finish that thought out loud. The same goes for you, Arthur. No matter how strong you are, death rarely comes from just weakness. It sneaks up when your guard is down. I'll protect your mother, and you can bet that our goal in this war will be to make it out in one piece and come back to you and your sister, but you have to do the same. Art's father paused for a second as his gaze hardened. We may not have raised you as we thought we had, with your past life memories and all, but you can be damn sure that Ellie sees you as her loving brother, so don't be too eager to sacrifice yourself for some vague, greater good. You need to come out of this war safely. Even if we lose this war, there will always be a chance to fight back. You only truly lose when you die, because there are no second chances after that. Art couldn't help but chuckle softly. Well, you know what I mean, his father snapped, eliciting a faint smile from Art's mother. Just then, a hurried knock drew their attention to the door. After trading glances with his parents, Art said, "It's open." The wooden door swung open to reveal Virion, still in the black robe he had worn for their meeting with the Vritra. "Boy, have you heard? Commander Virion." Art's parents bolted up from their seats. "Please, just Virion is fine for Arthur's parents. he replied with a quick wave of his hand. The attack? Art guessed, judging by his perturbed expression. Good, you have then. Virian nodded. And have you told your parents? My parents were the ones who told me. Virian's brows rose in mild surprise, but he merely shook his head as he regarded Art's parents. Then you must have heard what happened to your ex-party member. Art's father responded with a solemn nod. You have my deepest condolences, the commander said somberly. Some of the soldiers who were there have just arrived at the castle. I came to get Arthur, but I'm positive that at least the leader of the Twin Horns is here. Would you like to come with us? Art sent Sylvie a quick transmission telling her they were going to be on the lower floor and that she should stay with Ellie, and the four of them hurried to the teleportation room. The towering iron doors that protected the teleportation room had been left open. Soldiers, exhausted from battle, stumbled out of the glowing gate in the center of the chamber. Some still had their weapons drawn and bloody. Guards lined the walls, ready to intercept anyone other than Dickathan's soldiers who might attempt to pass through the portal. Handmaids and nurses stood by, equipped with fresh gauze, vials of antiseptics, and ointments to tend to the badly injured soldiers as they were carried away on stretchers. Spotting Helen first, Art nudged his parents, pointing in her direction. It was clear that the leader of the Twin Horns was in a wretched state. Her metal chest guard was cracked, with only a fragment of her shoulder brace still attached. The leather armor covering the rest of her body bore numerous gashes, lined with dried blood. Despite her injuries, her expression conveyed neither weariness nor pain. Instead, a fierce determination burned in her eyes as she strode down the platform, clutching her broken bow. "Helen!" Art's father called out, and they rushed toward her. Helen's expression softened upon seeing Art's parents, and she returned their embrace. Leaving Virion, who anxiously awaited Tess's arrival through the portal, Art made his way toward Helen. "I'm glad you're safe," Art said, giving her a gentle hug. "I'm sorry for what happened to Adam. If only I had stayed down there with you." "Don't," Helen stopped him. "No good ever comes of thinking like that. What happened, happened. The best thing to do is focus on how we'll make those damn Alacrians and their mutant pets pay. What you have to focus on right now is resting," Art's mother said. "Come, we'll have a nurse look at you." Helen insisted she was okay, but let Art's mother guide her out of the portal room, following the trail of wounded soldiers headed toward the medical wing, with Art's father trailing closely behind them. Art wondered when they would tell Helen about their plans to rejoin the Twin Horns, but he stayed near the teleportation platform, waiting for Tess to come back. The soldiers who escaped had managed to reach one of the hidden teleportation gates within the beast glades, but they hadn't had time for a head count. It was possible that the horde of mana beasts could still ambush them outside the dungeon. Each minute that passed by without Tess showing up made Art worry even more. It couldn't have been more than a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity passed as Art watched the unfamiliar faces stagger out of the teleportation gate. Finally, a familiar face popped out of the portal. It was the boy named Stannard. He had a few scuffs on his tunic and pants, and his face was smeared with dirt, but there was no blood on him. Art took that as a positive sign. He didn't hesitate. He dashed over to Stannard, pulling him aside the instant he stepped out of the gate. "Whoa! Where's Tessia? Was she with you?" Art bombarded him with questions, gripping his arm tightly. "Arthur Leywin?" A twinge crossed his face. "Ouch, your grip is a bit tight." Art immediately let go, his gaze darting from Stannard to the teleportation gate just in case Tess came out. "Sorry, Stannard. I heard about the ambush in the dungeon. Where's the rest of your team?" Art asked impatiently, forced to raise his voice over the increasing noise of groaning soldiers, shouted orders, and hurried conversations as friends and comrades found each other in the chaos. "That they should have been behind me," Stannard replied, looking back. "It was too crazy. We had to keep running in case they chased after us." Stannard was shivering, and his knees buckled. Art let him lean against him and helped him to the side of the room, where he could sit and lean against the wall. Looking at everyone's state, Art realized that Helen had clearly understated the severity of the ambush. Peering over the crowd of soldiers, he spotted the rest of Tess's teammates. The girl named Korea was carrying Darvis, the boy Art had dueled against, on her back, despite her own multiple wounds. His feet dragged on the ground because of their difference in height. Her curly brown hair was tangled and caked with blood at the ends, and her leather armor was tattered beyond repair. Rushing to them, Art lifted the unconscious augmenter from Korea's back and carried him himself, which seemed to surprise her. She thanked him, sounding exhausted, as he guided her to Stannard. When Art put Darvis down, he stirred awake with a pained groan. He tried to focus on Art from under his wild hair, and as soon as he realized who he was staring at, his glazed eyes narrowed. Because of that bloody technique of yours, I couldn't muster up any mana to fight." Despite his anger, Darvis's voice came out hoarse and weak. "I'm sorry, I really am." Darvis sank back against the wall before falling back into unconsciousness, joining the sleeping Stannard. Art snagged a pitcher of water from a passing handmaid and gave it to Korea. She immediately raised the glass pitcher to her lips, sloshing water down her front as she clumsily gulped down the entire contents before passing the empty container back to him. She slumped down next to Darvis, clearly spent. "Korea." Art gently shook her shoulder to keep her from falling asleep. "I need to know what happened to Tessia." Korea's eyes were already half closed. She seemed about to speak when instead, her lips curled into a grin, and she pointed behind him wordlessly. Confused, Art looked over his shoulder. Hobbling out of the portal, dirty, her clothes tattered, hair in disarray, armor dented and cracked, but alive and in one piece, was Tessia. Tess stepped through the teleportation gate and onto a platform, feeling weary and frustrated. She could have helped back there, but they wouldn't let her. The soldiers who stayed behind to fight had all echoed the same words, that she needed to go. Her safety was the priority. What the hell was the point of training so damn hard if everyone treated me like some glass sculpture? She let out a deep breath, hoping to expel the frustration from her system, but all it did was remind her of how thirsty she was. Tess looked around the crowd of soldiers, guards, and nurses for anyone with the water she needed to quench her parched throat. Then she caught sight of her teammates. Stannard and Darvis were asleep against the wall. Korea was sitting up, speaking to someone, and then she pointed at Tess. The man she had been talking to turned his head. Tess's chest tightened as he stood up from his crouching position. His furrowed brows and the sharp gaze with which he regarded his surroundings instantly relaxed as he locked eyes with her. It was Art. Tess stared mindlessly as he walked towards her. The first time she had seen him, in 2 years, he had been covered in blood and grime, looking somewhat like a monster himself. However, the Art approaching her now looked like a completely different person. Dressed in a sharp white tunic trimmed luxuriously with gold and a long black mantle that seemed to shroud him in mystery, he exuded a grand aura that belittled every royal family in Dicathan. His long hair was bound up, accentuating the sharp lines of his jaw. His auburn bangs fell messily over his forehead and past his azure eyes, which crinkled with his breathtaking smile. He was almost upon Tess before she snapped out of her daze. There were soldiers and guards nearby, and she had to keep her composure. It had barely been a day since she had last seen Art, and judging by his demeanor then, she was sure he disliked emotional reunions in public. With a hoarse cough, she tried to stand taller, puffing herself up to muster as much poise and dignity as she could, despite her unkempt appearance. She stuck her hand out for him to shake, keeping her expression stoic. "Good to see you so soon, Arth." But her gesture was ignored. His powerful hand wove underneath her arm, landing firmly on her back as he pulled her toward him. She stumbled forward at the sudden force, her face pressing against his thin tunic, bathing her in his warmth. Tess stood motionless in his embrace. She had been approached, pursued, and courted by almost every man brave enough to look past her lineage, and the only things she had ever felt for them were pity and annoyance. But now her body felt as if it had been both frozen and melted at the same time. Whether the entire room had fallen silent or her sense of hearing had just disappeared, she couldn't tell, but her other senses had become overwhelmed. Within the safe haven of his sturdy arms, a faint hint of oak and a crisp ocean breeze filled her nose as she felt him bury his face into her neck. Her limbs remained frozen, but her empty stomach fluttered uncontrollably when Art's arm squeezed just a fraction tighter. Art finally spoke. "I'm glad you're okay." His warm breath blew against her neck, sending shivers down her spine. Her arms twitched, instinctively wanting to hug him back, but the piercing stares she felt from everyone around them made her stop. "Of course I'm okay," she said, somehow mustering up the strength to push him away, despite every fiber in her body urging her to pull him closer. She could feel blood rushing all the way up her neck to the very top of her head as she stared at Art, his face just inches away from her own. Tess could see his eyes moving, tracing every feature of her face as he studied her. Taking a deep breath, as if a large weight had been lifted, he looked at her with a gentle smile. "Come on, I'll take you to your grandfather." It felt as though she was swimming in some sort of thick, viscous liquid in her head. The world around her blurred with muffled conversations and shadows of people she couldn't quite make out. Her body seemed to move on its own, acting and responding on instinct as her mind kept replaying her arrival at the castle. Now that she was just remembering it, she started analyzing every action and inaction of the scene, trying to put meaning into each thing Art had done. The firmness, yet tenderness of his hug, the desperation and relief that had poured out of him when his eyes locked onto hers. She replayed the scene over and over again in her head, nitpicking every little detail. However, the conclusion she reached every time was the same. She hated how composed he was every time they met, and after all this time she hated how weak and helpless she still felt around him. Tess wasn't able to see much of Art after their initial reunion at the castle. She was swept away and escorted to her room by a team of nurses as soon as her grandfather had released her from his embrace. After checking to make sure her teammates had been tended to, she plopped gingerly into her bed, finding comfort in the fact that her simply furnished room was exactly as she had left it. While the nurses removed her armor and wiped her down with scented towels, she felt her body sinking deeper and deeper into the sheets until the world faded to darkness. Should tell her, Virion. Art's familiar voice pulled Tess out of her slumber. Rubbing her eyes, she squinted at the morning sun just barely peeking above the layer of clouds below them. She took a second to assess the situation, then a frightening thought struck her. She immediately peeked underneath her covers, giving a sigh of relief to find herself clothed. She's going to find out eventually. You can't hide something like this from her. It's impossible. Art's muffled voice came from the other side of the door. He spoke in a hushed tone, but his words rang clearly in Tess's ears. It's fine if she finds out later, but she's not ready for this. Now shush. What if she hears? Her grandfather whispered back. She'll listen to you if you respect her enough to tell her. If she finds out from anyone else, what do you think she's going to do? Art argued, his voice growing sharper. Damn you, boy. What if she decides to go? Then what? We'll figure it out after we hear her response. Virion, you and I both know what your granddaughter is capable of once she puts her mind to something. I know, her grandfather snapped back. I just can't. Those Vritra bastards murdered Cynthia right here in this castle, Arthur. What if... Tess couldn't hear the rest of their conversation over the sound of her heart, which was beating louder and louder. Master Cynthia is dead. That's impossible, right? Master Cynthia had always been leagues above anyone Tess knew in terms of magical abilities. Her expertise in mana manipulation was on par with, maybe even above, her grandfather's. She had taught Tess everything from basic control to advanced execution of spells while sword fighting. There's no way she could be killed by Vritra thugs. Tess tried convincing herself of this, but her hands trembled as she gripped her blanket. She sat up in bed, wiping away a stray tear that had managed to escape, and waited for them to come in. Tess answered immediately when they knocked on the door. Dressed simply in a gray tunic and black pants with his hair tied up into a knot, Art came in first. He was followed by her grandfather, who was wearing the same black robe he had been wearing yesterday. After one glance at Tess, Art sighed and closed his eyes. How much did you hear? Enough, she answered matter-of-factly. Her grandfather took a step forward, his face furrowed in concern. Child! She cut him off, saying, Take me to her, please, as she slipped out of bed to find something to wear over her nightdress. Tess stayed silent as they descended the flights of stone stairs, the only sound coming from their echoing footsteps. Her grandfather led the way while Art trailed closely behind her. Her grandfather kept glancing back at Tess, but he didn't say anything until they reached the bottommost floor, where the dungeons and cells were. "Why is Master Cynthia holed up in such a filthy and degrading place?" Tess demanded. "These rooms are for murderers and traitors." "We don't have a burial ground in this castle, Tessia. We're keeping her here until circumstances permit us to safely give her a burial," her grandfather answered patiently. "And the dungeon has been empty since the start of the war, when we moved all the prisoners to more remote dungeons on the ground. While the rest of the castle was well cared for, the dungeon level seemed purposely designed to repulse those who might be held there. Dim light, provided by a handful of artifacts attached to the walls along the main corridor, revealed fungus growing between the stone blocks and thick nets of dusty webbing draped from the ceiling. Foul, musty smells blended with the near-toxic odor of decay and waste, and Tess, despite her grandfather's words, felt again that this was hardly a fitting resting place for such a renowned conjurer. At least Master Cynthia wasn't also surrounded by the screams and moans of prisoners. Only a hollow silence lingered. At the farthest end of the corridor, a single metal door stood with a soldier guarding it. "Open the door," her grandfather ordered. The armored guard nodded, his expression hidden beneath his helmet. He stepped aside and turned the rusted handle without turning around. The metal door screeched against the uneven ground as it opened. In the center of the empty cell lay a flawless stone casket with a small pile of flowers resting on top. "Only a few people know of her death," her grandfather explained, walking up and gently laying a hand on the top of the stone coffin. "She deserves a public ceremony. All her students, the professors who taught at Xyrus. She doesn't deserve to be here," Tess muttered. Her grandfather nodded. "I know." "Then why?" Tess demanded harshly. "Why is my master rotting away in a corner of this foul dungeon? For everything she did for this continent, she deserves a diamond coffin and a countrywide funeral. She deserves anything but this." "Tessia." Her grandfather rested his hand gently on her back, perhaps hoping to quell her anger. "How could you keep this from me, Grandpa? If I hadn't heard you through the door, when would I have found out? After the war?" She scoffed, shrugging his hand away as tears blurred her vision. "Is there anything else you're hiding from me? Despite everything I did to show you that I was mature, you still treat me like a child." "That's because you are a child," Art snapped. "What?" Tess blurted, her face going red with anger. "How can you should know better than anyone else how I'm feeling, but you call me a child? You, of all people?" Arthur's face settled into a hard-edged mask as Tess huffed in frustration. The stern eye with which he regarded her cast into doubt her memory of yesterday's affectionate hug. "Maybe I'm saying this because I know both you and Grandpa Virian so well, Tess. What you're doing right now, needlessly putting yourself in harm's way just to prove a point, is no better than a child throwing a tantrum," Art continued. "Arthur," her grandfather cut in. "Enough." "How dare you?" Tess seethed, tears rolling down her cheeks. "If you took a minute to think this whole situation through, you'd realize why your grandfather had to keep it a secret. What do you think would happen if he were to announce that someone had been killed by our enemy in what's supposed to be the safest location on the continent?" Art said, his gaze unrelenting. "Well, I'm sorry that not everyone is as smart as you," Tess retorted. Art's gaze softened. "You're only 17, Tess. And you're only 16. Yet Grandpa, Master Alder, and even Master Cynthia have never treated you like a kid, even though you're younger than me," she argued. "If they see me as an adult, that's something they've come to realize on their own. I haven't been deliberately trying to prove it," he answered. "This isn't about—" Tess tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She broke down, falling to her knees and sobbing uncontrollably. "Arthur, I think you've said enough," her grandfather growled. "Guard, escort him out." Tess didn't look up as Art left. She had no idea what kind of expression he had on his face, or whether he felt any remorse. It was too much to bear. "Tessia," her grandfather said softly. Let's take some time together to pay our respects to Cynthia. I'm sure that, instead of having millions of people at a ceremony, she'd rather have the few she truly cherished mourning for her. Mustering up a shaky nod, Tess whispered hoarsely, "Thank you." Both turned to face the smooth stone casket where her master lay. Waves of emotion continued to toss and turn within her. Her grandfather knelt down beside her, gently stroking her trembling back. "After this, I'll tell you everything." "I understand your problem, Gray, but I'm not sure I'm the best person to help you with this," the headmaster said. "No matter how lacking your Kai pool may be compared to most kids your age, you're still a child with plenty of time for that to change. However, and I say this as a general life lesson, if you find yourself lacking in resources, save what you have for when you need it the most." Gray pondered her cryptic advice regarding his Kai issues, trying to decipher its deeper meaning. "Thank you, Headmaster Wilbeck," he said with a grin, heading towards the door. "Gray!" the headmaster called out from behind her desk. He stopped, glancing back around the doorway. "Yes?" "How is Cecilia getting along with you and Nico?" she asked. "Well," Gray hesitated. "Besides her little accidents, I'd say we're slowly getting through to her." "She hasn't said a word to you two, has she?" Headmaster Wilbeck sighed. "Nope, not a single one," Gray confirmed. "Very well. I do hope you keep trying to break her out of her shell. If anyone can do it, it's you two," she encouraged. Gray stepped back into her office. "Headmaster?" "Yes?" she replied, looking up from her desk. "Why are you so insistent on us becoming friends with Cecilia?" Gray asked. The headmaster's lips curled into a gentle smile as she rose from her chair. "That, my child, is a story I'm hoping she'll tell you herself. I mean, she seems normal enough, but everyone's scared of her because of those accidents, even though they only happen occasionally," Gray continued, scratching his head. "Not that Nico and I are scared or anything, but, you know, a few kids have been sent to the infirmary because of her, so I thought it'd be better to know more to help her." Headmaster Wilbeck's smile softened as she listened to Gray's concerns, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and understanding. Headmaster Wilbeck walked around her desk and tousled Gray's hair. "Your job isn't to help her, it's to be her friend. Let me handle helping her," she said gently. "Yes, Mother," Gray responded with a mock salute. Her gentle, usually composed eyes widened in surprise at his words. "It's Headmaster Olivia, or Headmaster Wilbeck to you, Gray," she replied firmly, though a hint of affection softened her gaze. Gray didn't want to leave her office. He longed to stay and help with the endless pile of paperwork that seemed to grow by the day. But he knew she would never allow it. She always reminded him that it was her responsibility, not his. Dragging his feet as he left the cozy, cluttered office, Gray trudged down the hall toward his room. He often imagined what life would be like as Headmaster Wilbeck's son. He pictured her stern yet loving voice scolding him every time he got into trouble. In his daydreams, he helped her around the house, doing the dishes, taking out the trash, mowing the lawn. And when she returned home, he'd massage her shoulders, the ones she always seemed to be rubbing from stress. Nico found it odd that Gray wanted to do so much for Headmaster Wilbeck, suggesting it was typically a daughter's role to pamper her mother. Gray disagreed. If he had a mother like Headmaster Wilbeck, he would ensure she was spoiled. He imagined himself helping dye the white streaks in her brown hair. When he was older, he planned to earn a lot of money to buy her fancy clothes, a car, and a house. Perhaps this was the distinction between someone like Nico, who had memories of his parents, and someone like Gray, who had none. Gray had no recollection of what his parents looked like. Nico harbored resentment toward his parents. Even mentioning his surname Sever would provoke him. Gray didn't even have a surname. The thought of being Gray Wilbeck, son of Olivia Wilbeck, provided a peculiar sense of solace. The sharp creak of the floorboard beneath his feet snapped Gray out of his fantasy, and he let out a long, defeated breath. Kneeling down, he adjusted the old, misaligned floorboard and secured it back into place. Testing the floor with his feet, he nodded satisfactorily at the plank's silence. In the hallway, a group of children came running, chasing each other playfully. "Gray, I'm gonna tag you!" giggled a little girl named Theta as she dashed toward him with her arms outstretched. "Oh yeah?" Gray stuck out his tongue playfully. "I bet you can't." Theta accepted the challenge and increased her pace. As she came within reach, she made a grab for Gray's waist, aiming to tag him, but he effortlessly twirled out of her grasp. Gray laughed victoriously. "You're going to have to try harder than—" He swayed to his right, narrowly avoiding Odo's hand. The rest of the kids who had been playing with Theta joined in, deciding they were all it in this impromptu game of tag. Boys and girls flocked toward Gray, arms stretched wide to cover more ground, but he effortlessly dipped and weaved around them. They flailed desperately, using every part of their bodies in hopes of tagging him, but their efforts were futile. Eventually, Theta and her friends strategized and circled around Gray, slowly closing in as they giggled excitedly. When they grew impatient and sprang at him, Gray reacted swiftly. Just as they were about to touch him, he jumped up and seized the broken chain that had once supported an old chandelier before it was sold. Gripping tightly to avoid slipping, he swung from the chain, using the momentum of his leap. Theta, Odo, and their friends chuckled among themselves, surprised to have missed their target. Launching himself from the old chain, Gray landed a few feet away and planted his hands on his hips, laughing victoriously. "You guys are 5 years too young to best the mighty Gray." "Not fair," Odo groaned, rubbing his head. "Yeah, you're too fast," Theta agreed, untangling herself from the group of kids. "Shush, only weaklings complain when facing defeat," Gray said, deepening his voice dramatically. "Now off I go. My heroic powers are needed elsewhere." He dashed away as the kids laughed among themselves. "The mighty Gray has arrived," Gray announced proudly, opening the door to his room. Yeah. Close the door on your way in," Nico replied nonchalantly, not bothering to turn around. He was preoccupied with something on his cluttered bed. "The kids are more fun than you," Gray teased, clicking his tongue. "What are you doing anyway?" Nico held up his right hand, covered in a fuzzy black glove, wearing a proud grin on his face. "You're into knitting now?" Gray asked with a smirk, reaching for the glove. Nico stretched out his gloved hand, gripping Gray's forearm. A sudden wave of pain, like an intense muscle cramp, radiated up Gray's arm from Nico's grasp. His roommate immediately let go, but wore a smug look on his face. Never underestimate the power of knitting. "What the hell?" Gray's gaze shifted from the glove to his sore arm and back again. "Pretty neat, right?" Nico stared contentedly at his gloved hand. "After the run-in with those thugs, I was researching a way to defend myself in case something like that ever happened again. And after compiling the notes I took on a rather interesting book I found about Kai conducting materials, I was able to design this glove." "How does it work? Why did my arm suddenly cramp up when you grabbed me?" Gray asked, his fingers itching to grab hold of Nico's newest creation. "It's pretty cool, actually," Nico said, slapping Gray's hand away. "There are these microfibers on the palm of the gloves that can conduct Kai to a certain degree. The microfibers lengthen in reaction to my Kai and reach into the muscles when I grab someone. There's a small conducting stone on the inside of the glove that harnesses the Kai I emit, and it shoots out through the microfibers and into my enemy's muscle. In this case, it was your arm." "That is pretty neat, but why don't you just learn how to fight like me?" Gray asked. "First of all, you never learned to fight, and I need to have toys like these because, unlike someone," his eyes darted to Gray, "I don't have the reflexes of some primitive carnivore. If I had to say, my reflexes range somewhere between a sloth and a turtle." Gray chortled at the comparison. "Well, the glove looks useful and all, but it seems like it'd only buy you some time," he pointed out, flexing his cramped hand. "Yup. And another downside is that the microfibers are expensive and don't last very long," Nico remarked as he peeled off the fuzzy black glove. I spent some of the money we got from pawning the jewelry to buy the materials. Gray glanced at the stacks of books cluttering Nico's side of the room. I'm sure you'll figure something out. How did you manage to get the rest of the money to the headmaster? Ah, I gave it to a guy I know. He delivered it to Headmaster Wilbeck as a generous donation in exchange for a cut, Nico explained. Gray groaned. How much of the money actually ended up in the orphanage anyway? Between buying your books and materials and giving a cut to your guy, I doubt even half made it to Headmaster Wilbeck. I didn't have a choice. There's no way Olivia would accept money from us without asking a million questions, Nico defended, rubbing his head after Gray thumped it. It's Headmaster Wilbeck, Gray corrected with a playful scold. Anyway, I got a few books that could be useful for you too. Check it out, Nico exclaimed, nodding toward a small stack of books behind him. Oh! Gray's eyes lit up as he reached for the books. Very well. This magnanimous gentleman will forgive you. It's magnanimous, Nico corrected with a grin. Unable to come up with a clever retort, Gray decided to let it slide. Just then, the room began to shake. I hope that's not... Gray began. Yup, Cecilia again. She's having another accident, Nico interrupted, confirming Gray's fears. They lay in their beds as the erratic tremors continued. It's lasting longer than usual this time, Gray observed. Nico sat up and slipped on his glove. Let's go check it out. It's dangerous. Remember what happened to that volunteer who tried to restrain her? Gray warned. Yeah, he didn't stand a chance. He was a big guy too, Nico recalled somberly. I hate just waiting here while she suffers. It must be agonizing for her. With a resigned sigh, Gray got up, ready to accompany Nico. Then a thought crossed his mind. You like her, don't you? No way! I barely even know her, Nico protested. Gray didn't respond, but couldn't suppress the smile creeping onto his face. Nico's brows furrowed. All right, maybe she's a little attractive. That's all. Sure. Gray dodged a playful swipe from his friend. Chunks of plaster rained down from the ceiling, scattering across the hallway as the entire orphanage continued to tremble. On their way to Cecilia's room, Gray spotted Theta and Odo hiding underneath the dining table with some of the younger children. Veering left at the end of the hallway, Nico and Gray stopped in front of an isolated iron door, distinct from all the other rooms in the large house. Headmaster Wilbeck was already there, accompanied by several adult volunteers who assisted in maintaining the orphanage. The tremors had intensified. One volunteer, Randall, a kind and burly man who typically tended the garden, prepared to enter, while another struggled to open the heavy door. Given the severity of the tremors, it seemed unlikely Randall could reach Cecilia in time. Snatching the glove from Nico's hand, Gray bolted towards the door. Gray! Nico called out, but before anyone could react, Gray dashed past Randall and slipped into the room as soon as the door swung open. Inside, he instinctively sidestepped, narrowly avoiding a force that sent Randall crashing against the corridor wall. Gray had heard stories about Cecilia's peculiar abilities, but facing them head-on made those tales seem like bedtime stories. With determination, he sprinted toward the center of the large room where Cecilia lay convulsing. Panic flashed across her face when she noticed him approaching. Cecilia, a girl with an unusually vast Kai pool, was an anomaly among Kai users. While most could only muster small gusts of energy with their Kai, Cecilia unleashed torrents of it uncontrollably. According to what others had said, these outbursts were triggered by even the slightest emotional disturbance. While some might see her power as a gift, for a teenage girl like Cecilia, Gray could only imagine it felt like a curse. Trusting his instincts, he awkwardly dodged the blasts of Kai hurtling toward him. A single hit could render him unconscious, or worse. Cold sweat trickled down Gray's face as he danced with a near-invisible force capable of shattering his bones like twigs. Sensing a slight breeze, he rolled to his left instinctively, narrowly evading another burst of Cecilia's Kai that slammed into the wall with a loud thud. Gray extended his gloved hand toward Cecilia, determined to reach her despite the dangers. Instinctively, he leaped to the right as another burst of Kai thudded behind him. You can't, Cecilia protested through gritted teeth. You'll get hurt. She lay sprawled on her bed amidst the wreckage of her room, with pillow stuffing and mattress foam scattered around. Undeterred, Gray crawled closer, rolling away just in time to avoid another incoming burst of Kai that grazed his right arm. Ignoring the pain, Gray pushed forward, his heart racing. With his left hand, he reached out, channeling his Kai into Nico's glove. Placing his palm just above Cecilia's stomach, where her Kai center lay, he exerted all his energy. The glove thrummed with power as Gray poured his Kai into Cecilia. She gasped in pain, her eyes widening before closing as unconsciousness overtook her. Strands of blonde hair fell across her face as her flushed cheeks gradually returned to their usual color. Struggling to rise, Gray found his body unresponsive, overexerted from channeling his Kai. How pitiful, he thought, before succumbing to exhaustion and joining Cecilia in her slumber. Sir, please, wake up. An unfamiliar voice startled Art awake, dragging him out of the unwanted memories in his dreams. Art's vision focused, and he was able to make out the shape of a woman, her features cast into shadow by the light behind her. Sir, I'm begging you. Please, we need you bathed and prepared for Commander Virian's speech. The handmaid shook his arm gently, but Art turned away from her, still half asleep. Move out of the way. I'll wake him up. A familiar voice grunted, and a loud crackle resounded from its direction. Art immediately sprang to his feet, catching the projectile of lightning in his hand. Baron, a displeasure to see you again, Art said sharply. He was still in a foul mood from his argument with Tessia yesterday. I see you've learned some new tricks, Baron responded, his hand still outstretched. It had been over 2 years since Art had last seen the blonde lance. He hadn't changed much, except that he had cut his hair short, and the scowl on his face was even harsher. Don't you know it's dishonorable to attack someone from behind? Art asked, hopping off his bed. Well, we're at war, he shrugged, then turned to head out the door. Now get changed. The rest of the lances are already at the teleportation gate. Art watched as Baron, whose brother he had killed, walked out of the room. Despite their differences, Art understood what Baron meant when he said they were at war. Both of them were invaluable. The handmaid timidly approached Art. Sir, please. I hate to keep nagging, but... It's all right, Rosa. I just got direct consent from Commander Virian to speed up the process. Another, much bulkier handmaid interrupted as she stomped in, pulling a large cart covered by a sheet. The handmaid named Rosa glanced back and forth between her co-worker and Art. Are you sure, Milda? I don't think we should do anything to offend... Milda held up a meaty finger to silence her associate. She then turned to Art with a stern gaze as she began rolling up the sleeves of her blouse. Now, sir, if you're not in the mood, or you're not capable of washing yourself, I'll be more than happy to get into the shower with you and wash you. Art inadvertently took a horrified step back. No, I'm very much in the mood to wash myself. Very good, she said. After you wash, please dress in this set of armor Lord Aldir prepared for the speech today. Milda dramatically removed the sheet from the cart she had brought in, revealing a mannequin dressed in a stunning suit of armor, which Art would soon be wearing. Art grumbled. "I look ridiculous," as he hobbled closer to the mirror to study himself. The plated armor was gaudy and inefficient in design. His chest and shoulders were protected by silver pauldrons and a gorget that reached up to his chin, allowing for only minimal movement of his neck. Even more restricting, his hips and thighs were guarded by tassets that prohibited him from raising his legs. The subtle detailings on his gauntlets and greaves matched those on the breastplate, and a blazing red cape fell down to the back of his knees, covering the large decorative sword strapped to his lower back. The timid handmaid carefully began tying up Art's hair, whispering, "You look awe-inspiring, sir." "Anyone who can fight proficiently while wearing this death trap deserves my respect," Art replied, struggling to lift his arms above his shoulders. From the bed, Sylvie, still half asleep, pointed out, "Well, at least you'll look impressive to the crowd." Art shot back mentally, "Zip it. You're lucky I'm not making you wear any armor." "My scales are my armor," Sylvie retorted, arching her back and stretching like a cat before nimbly hopping off the bed. "There, all done," the handmaid announced, securing Art's hair with a golden band. "Your armor isn't just majestic to look at. I see it has protective runes engraved into it as well." Art sighed. "I understand the armor, but must I wear this sword? I have one of my own, and it's a pretty nice one too." With that, he took Dawn's ballad from his dimension ring, displaying it. The timid handmaid touched her short brown hair, her eyes shifting away uncomfortably. It's very pretty, sir, but..." Before she could finish, the bear-like handmaid interjected, her voice booming. "It's too thin. It doesn't make you look powerful," she declared, firmly securing Art's pauldrons with her meaty hands. "Perfect. You're good to go." Art gazed down at his teal-bladed sword, masterfully forged by an eccentric Asura. He admired it briefly before sliding it back into its sheath. With a deep breath, he placed the sword back into his dimension ring. As Art walked stiffly out of the room, Sylvie, still reluctant to speak out loud unless they were completely alone, chirped in his head, "I bet your new armor is really going to impress the crowd." "I'm hoping to stay on the sidelines through this whole speech," Art replied mentally as they made their way down the empty hallway. "I know Virion wanted all the main players here today to raise morale, but I think the lances are enough for that." The castle was unusually quiet, with its residents and most of the workers having been allowed in earlier that morning to find seats in the crowd. Art hadn't had a chance to see his family today, but the timid handmaid had passed along their message. They were looking forward to seeing him up on the balcony. "I can't believe Virion decided to hold the speech at Atiston, though. Isn't that where the Alacrian ships are heading?" Sylvie sounded concerned from her spot, nestled on his shoulder. "I think it makes sense. It's a bit of a wild card, but if done right, and I'm sure that's what Virion is shooting for, the crowd will see our force as much more imposing up close than their ships from afar. I guess?" Navigating the stairs in the bulky armor proved a daunting task for Art. With each step, he grew more tempted to leap down the center of the spiral staircase, consequences be damned. The sharp ringing of his metal greaves against the stone pathway echoed through the narrow corridor, alerting the two guards stationed at the teleportation chamber entrance to his approach. As Art reached the familiar iron doors, the guards welcomed him with courteous bows before they began the process of unlocking the imposing entrance to the circular room. "Everyone is waiting inside," the Augmenter guard announced. He slid open the metal door, revealing the central figures of the war within. The sight was impressive. Baron Wykes, Varai Orai, and Aya Greffin, the three remaining lances, stood in their positions, each clad in decorated white armor as gaudy as Art's own. Closest to the teleportation gate, Virion had replaced his black mourning robe with a lavish olive tunic that draped past his knees over silken white trousers. The tunic, adorned with ornate golden embroidery, clearly marked him as a noble, complemented by a golden sash wrapped around his waist. A bronze circlet rested snugly above his brows, and his white hair cascaded loosely over his shoulders. Standing adjacent to the commander, The pinnacle of authority in this war were his son and daughter-in-law, Alduin and Mariel Erelith, Tessia's parents. Alduin wore a silver tunic of similar design and decoration to his father's, while Mariel donned an elegant silver dress, clearly meant to match her husband's outfit. "Look who finally decided to show up," Virion remarked with an approving nod, his gaze sweeping over Art's attire. "Commander Virion," Art replied, dipping his head respectfully. He then turned toward Tessia's parents. "King Alduin, Queen Mariel. It's been a while." "That it has," Alduin responded with a smile, rubbing his chin as he scrutinized Art. Mariel acknowledged him with a faint nod. Art then shifted his attention to Blaine and Priscilla Glader, the former king and queen of Sapin. "King Blaine, Queen Priscilla. It's been even longer," he said, offering a polite smile and bowing as much as his cumbersome armor allowed. Blaine had noticeably aged since Art last saw him. More streaks of gray now threaded through his mane of fiery maroon hair. He wore a silken black tunic beneath large gunmetal pauldrons that covered his shoulders and collar, giving him an imposing presence. His wife, Priscilla, presented a stark contrast with her attire. She had chosen a fluttery black dress, richly embroidered with delicate silver flowers that twinkled in the light. Her black hair, shimmering with a hint of blue, was elegantly tied up, revealing her neck, which appeared almost pure white against her dark ensemble. The two royal couples, King Alduin and Queen Mariel, and King Blaine and Queen Priscilla, stood in stark contrast to each other. Despite their differences, each exuded an air of dignity that Art knew would captivate the crowd waiting for them. "You've grown," Mariel observed, her sharp eyes seeming to pierce through Art rather than merely seeing him. "Growing comes with age," Art responded calmly. "Of course it does," Blaine grunted. "And you'll continue to grow, not just in height, but in strength, which is what I need from one of my best soldiers." Art glanced back at Baron and Vere, the lances under Blaine's command, and shook his head slightly. "Regardless of my roots or race, in a war of this magnitude, I'd like to consider myself a soldier for this entire continent." An elderly dwarf, who had been standing alongside Virion and the two royal couples, stepped forward and interjected. He positioned himself between Blaine and Art, extending his hand. "It's finally nice to meet you, Arthur." Though he only came up to Art's sternum, Radius stood ramrod straight with squared shoulders, giving him an appearance of greater height than his stature allowed. A scar ran down the left side of his face, cutting through his closed left eye and extending down to his jaw. Despite the ruggedness of his visage, his open eye emanated a gentle quality. Art accepted Radius's large hand, noting the sandpaper-like texture of his palms. "I apologize for my ignorance, but I don't think I've had the pleasure of meeting you." "No, we haven't met," Radius chuckled softly, "but I've heard quite a bit about you from the letters Elijah has sent back. I am Radius." Recognition dawned in Art's eyes. "You're—" "Yes, I've been Elijah's guardian since he was an infant," Radius confirmed, his solemn smile causing a pang in Art's chest. "I'm sorry I couldn't get there in time to help him," Art murmured, lowering his gaze. Radius shook his head gently. "It's not your fault. That child was always a magnet for trouble." Clasping Radius's hand in both of his, Art stared straight into the older man's eye. "If he's still alive, I'll bring him back to you. I give you my word." "Thank you," Radius whispered, releasing Art's hands, which suddenly felt fragile to him. Breaking the silence, Virion addressed the group. "Radius is the new delegate for the dwarves. We'll be going ahead first," he announced. "The gatekeeper will receive my transmission and signal you to go through when the time is right." The group of 6 proceeded through the gate, leaving the teleportation room in silence. Art resolved to spend more time with Radius, curious about young Elijah and the man who had raised him. Feeling a light tap on his shoulder, or rather, hearing a light tap on his shoulder plate, Art turned around to find himself face to face with Phantasm, the elven lance. "We've seen each other before, but I've never given you the pleasure of introducing myself." Aya Greffen smiled coyly, tucking her wavy black hair behind her ear as she extended a hand for Art to accept. "My name is Aya Greffin." There was something peculiar about her voice, a captivating timbre infused with a faint sweetness, delivered at a volume that drew one in closer to hear her. Everything about her exuded allure, from the way she carried herself to the subtle motions of her hands and fingers that commanded attention, though it felt unnaturally captivating. Art sensed the enchantment in her voice. "Well then," Art replied with a smile, taking a step back. "It's a pleasure being formally introduced, Aya Greffin." He knew she anticipated a kiss on the back of her hand, but instead, he grabbed it and shook it firmly. "I hope we can get along," she said, her smile unwavering as she withdrew her hand swiftly. As Art watched her stride confidently back to her original spot, her hips swaying, a sense of unease crept over him. Aside from her conspicuous seductiveness, Art sensed that the remaining elf lance was formidable just from being near her. He had witnessed Varai's strength firsthand, but had yet to observe Aya in combat. According to reports, she was reputed to be one of the deadliest among the lances. Now, with her scrutinizing gaze fixed upon him, it was evident those claims held weight. Varai, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "I see your training has gone well. You've just stepped out of the initiate silver stage and into mid-silver." In contrast to Aya's seductive demeanor, Varai maintained a reserved and dignified posture. Art observed that she had recently cut her long white hair short, the ends now resting just past her neck. Her bangs were pinned to the side, exposing a small scar above her right brow, a detail that might easily be overlooked. Her dark brown eyes were sharp, and her perpetually furrowed brows gave her a stern countenance as she continued to study Art intently. Sylvie hunched over, baring her small fangs at Varai. "It's okay, Sylv. She's an ally, remember?" "I've still got a long way to go if I want to reach the white stage," Art admitted to Varai, tearing his gaze away from her penetrating stare. "Not as long as you might think," the white-haired lance replied. "What do you—" "Gatekeeper, how much longer do we have to wait?" Baron interrupted, tapping his foot impatiently on the ground, clad in his armor. The elderly gatekeeper flinched. "General Byron, Commander Virian has not—" "Ah! I just received word from him now. Please enter." Baron strode purposefully toward the teleportation gate, evidently eager to leave either the confines of the chamber or the company of the other lances. Art empathized with his sentiment. Well, that was uncomfortable, Sylvie thought. "Tell me about it," Art replied mentally, gesturing for Aya and Varai to go ahead of him. Aya threw him a playful wink as she swayed past, while Varai's expression remained stoic. Stepping through the teleportation gate, the surroundings blurred around Art. Upon arrival, he winced at the abrupt change in noise level. Cheers erupted from below, and the ground beneath them trembled. They found themselves in a large rectangular room that opened onto a spacious balcony. Virian and the kings and queens stood at the balcony's edge, waving down at the crowd. They weren't alone. Beside them were Tess, Curtis, and Cathelm, all enthusiastically greeting the immense crowd, visible even from their vantage point. "Please, generals, be ready to go on Commander Virian's signal," instructed a thin handmaid who smoothed Aya's hair back into place, mussed by the frigid ocean wind. "Generals?" Art glanced at the handmaid, perplexed. "Arthur, Lady Sylvie, I see you are finally here," a familiar voice called from behind. Turning around, Art spotted Aldir seated before a tea set, a cup in his hand, while his third eye focused on him. "And I see that you're staying in the shadows," Art greeted the Asura, while Sylvie nodded her head in acknowledgement. "That is my job," Aldir said, raising his cup in a solitary toast. "Well, can you tell me what my job is right now? Because I'm not a lance, which means I'm not a general." "Patience. You just have to wait 5 seconds," he said, pouring himself another cup from the pot. The cheers had subsided as Virian began addressing the gathered crowd. "Many of you have traveled far to be here, and that fills me with pride. As you have seen, standing beside me are your leaders, the very individuals who have defended this continent and will continue to protect us in the future." Another surge of cheers erupted as Radius, the Glader family, and the Aerolith family waved once more. However, while these are the heroes in plain sight, there are also heroes in the shadows who continually risk their lives to defend this continent. Please join me in welcoming the lances of Dickathon. Varai, Aya, and Baron stepped forward to the edge of the balcony, heads held high and shoulders squared. Virion and the royal families turned to greet them warmly. An even louder ovation erupted as the three lances appeared. The cacophony of shouts and cheers coalesced into a unified chant that swelled in volume. After several moments of chanting, Virion raised a hand, swiftly quieting the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people. "Everyone, we are in a time of war," Virion spoke sternly after a moment of silence. "I understand that half of the lances are absent, and this is not an oversight. Some are currently engaged in missions and were unable to join us." Alder and Art exchanged glances at Virion's statement, but neither commented. Art understood the potential impact of revealing that one of the lances had already fallen on the crowd. Virion pressed on, his voice unwavering. "The lances have shed blood and tears to protect Dickathon, but in these uncertain times, strength alone is not enough. We must unite to defend our homes. At the founding of the lances nearly 4 years ago, we vowed that the title of lance would not be bound by birth or status, but earned through hard work, talent, and strength. Today marks the dawn of a new era, and with it, the rise of new heroes. One such hero has emerged and stands among us. Please join me in welcoming our newest lance, Arthur Leywin." As Art approached the edge of the balcony, Virion, Radius, the lances, and both royal families turned their attention to him. The applause surged into a deafening roar at his appearance, echoing through the space. Virion stood waiting for him at the balcony's edge. Baron and Varai maintained stoic expressions, their faces impassive as Art passed by, but Aya's lips curled into a playful smile, nodding approvingly. Tessia gave him a sharp look, likely still upset from their argument the previous day. In contrast, Cathilne's eyes crinkled in a rare smile. Her brother, Curtis, waved enthusiastically, while their parents and the other key figures on the balcony joined the crowd in applause. Art stepped out into the open air. The morning sun shone brilliantly overhead, casting a warm, golden light over the vast assembly below. As his eyes adjusted, he was struck by the sight before him. Humans, elves, and dwarves filled the expanse as far as he could see, stretching towards the horizon. The tightly packed crowd surged forward, each person hoping to get just a bit closer to their continent's leaders. The palpable energy of excitement, respect, and jubilation reached all the way to the balcony. "What?" Virion said, his smile broad and welcoming. "Never had a crowd of over 1 million people cheer for you?" Art shook his head and smiled, recalling the countless times he had experienced such adulation in his past life. "Was this your idea?" "Why? Are you upset?" Virion asked, turning to face the crowd and nudging Art forward so the people below could get a better view of him. "If it was anyone other than you behind this, I might be," Art replied. "Good. Now keep smiling and wave at them. They can see you on a wide-scale projection behind us," Virion advised, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Art stole a quick glance at the enormous screen behind him, thinking of Emily Watskin, who had once confided in class that she had designed this artifact. He raised an arm and waved to the masses, with Sylvie perched on his shoulder, mimicking the gesture. The thunderous cheers gradually softened into a hum of excitement as everyone, except for Virion and Art, stepped back from the balcony railing. Virion unclipped the voice-amplifying artifact from his collar and turned to Art. "Now," he began, "you wouldn't happen to have a speech ready about the upcoming war, would you?" "You're kidding me, right?" Art said, struggling to maintain a calm smile. "I want you to be the one to make the announcement," Virion insisted, his tone steady as he handed the artifact to Art. "Virion, I can't." Art's voice wavered as he looked out at the eager crowd below. "I wasn't even prepared to be offered a position as a lance," let alone give a speech as one. Virian's voice was firm but encouraging as he addressed Art. I didn't want you to prepare. These are your people, Arthur. You grew up among them. They'll listen to you with far more openness and empathy than they would to some spoon-fed noble. That's only if I can deliver a well-thought-out speech, Art countered, reaching out to shake Virian's hand, hoping to delay the inevitable. Virian returned the gesture, his grip reassuring. I trust you. Just speak from your heart. He stepped back, and the crowd's murmur turned into an anxious hush. From his vantage point, the people below appeared no larger than the nail of his thumb, yet Art's eyes quickly found his family. His parents stood together, and his sister was perched atop Boo's large shoulder. The sight of them grounded him. Although completely unprepared, Art's apprehension faded as he locked eyes with his mother. Even with his enhanced vision, he could barely discern the gentle smile on her face, but it was enough. In that moment, he knew exactly what to say. Art let out a deep breath and stepped to the edge of the castle balcony, activating the voice-amplifying artifact with a flick of his fingers. The device emitted a low buzz, signaling that it was on. He leaned on the balcony rail and waited patiently as the fresh round of cheers gradually faded into silence. Despite my age, Art began, his voice now carrying effortlessly over the vast crowd below. I've read countless books on this continent's history and economy. Yet none of those books explain what truly makes a citizen love their country. Historians often speculate that it's simply a natural inclination because of where we're born. One author, Jespik Lemter, suggests that there is an intricate trickle-down effect, beginning with leaders who can provide for their people. This security allows parents to feed their children, and as long as that flow of stability is maintained, loyalty to the country that provides it naturally follows. I tell you this because I disagree with both claims. I choose to believe that loyalty isn't a calculated decision by the citizens, nor should it be diminished by the assumption that loyalty is framed purely by the accident of our births. Loyalty to one's country is born of mutual respect between a country's leadership and its people, from the support of friends, neighbors, and strangers, from the promise to protect one another and progress together. Perhaps it is presumptuous to even try defining the term, as we each carry in our heart our own definition, just as we each show loyalty to our country in our own way. But one thing is certain: loyalty is always easier when times are easy. It's easy to cheer for your king when your children are well fed and your land is prosperous. It's easy to rally behind an army when you know it's going to win, but it is unlikely that this war will be easy. Your loyalty to this country, to this entire continent, will be tested. There will be times when you'll be faced with a choice between dying with your people or hoping to live with your enemies. The atmosphere among the crowd darkened as Art's voice fell into a whisper, but he continued. The fact that I'm up here right now speaks for the choice I'm going to make when that time comes for me, and it isn't because of my title as a lance. My loyalty wasn't bought, but neither was it freely given. My loyalty to this continent and to everyone on it was nurtured during my childhood in the countryside, then as an adventurer, a student, and then a teacher. Now, it'll be proven as a lance. Sure, Dickathan and its leaders have their flaws, but what no one can say is that they haven't tried. The joining of the three kingdoms to form the council would have been unheard of only a few generations ago. Yet the leaders of the three races put aside their pride and differences to unite, to share their resources with one another, in order to better the lives of all who live here. While discrimination may still exist, this land we live in belongs to all of us. Just beyond this city is an army, over 100 ships approaching our shores. We've been given the option to either give up the lives of all the royal families who have served this continent in exchange for our enemy taking our land without a fight, or to proceed with this war on a greater, much more devastating scale. Commander Virion was ready to give up his own life to protect this continent, to protect you. But I said it wasn't his call. This doesn't only affect his and his family's lives, but the lives of everyone here. Art turned back toward the balcony, motioning for Virion and the others to step forward. I would rather fight and risk dying for the life I've come to love here than betray my brethren in hopes of a promise that our enemies who have already torn families apart, may or may not keep, he declared, his voice resolute. But I dare not speak for everyone on this continent, Art continued. The only thing I can say with full confidence is that if given the chance, every one of us up here will fight to our last breath to protect Dickathan from those who dare invade us. It was utter quiet for what seemed like hours until a single voice broke the silence. Long live Dickathan! The solitary cry ignited a powerful response. The crowd erupted in a thunderous, unified chant, their voices rising in a wave that seemed to shake the very foundations of the castle. Long live Dickathan! Long live Dickathan! Long live Dickathan! Art turned off the voice-amplifying artifact and exhaled deeply, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. Just as he began to relax, Sylvie, who had been perched on his shoulder, leapt into the air. As the crowd's cheers reached their crescendo, his bond transformed from her small, pearly fox form into the majestic dragon. When she spread her wings, Art realized once again how much she had grown over the years. Her wingspan surpassed the width of the balcony, and gales blasted down on the crowd with each beat of her black wings. While Art was startled that she would reveal herself now, and without giving him any notice, he played along. Art unsheathed the giant sword on his back and held it high in the air, just as his bond faced the sky and let loose a thunderous roar that drowned out all other noise, resounding from the stones around them and out over the gathered crowd, instilling fear and awe in all who heard. Sylvie's theatrics immediately intensified the crowd's chanting, and an even louder cheer erupted at their powerful display. Art turned back around to see wide eyes staring at him after this turn of events. I thought you didn't have anything prepared, Virion said with a raised brow. Art shrugged as Sylvie shrank back to her pup form and hopped onto his shoulder. I improvised. I did good, right? Sylvie chirped in his mind. You got the message across, Art replied, tousling the fur on her little head. Curtis came up to Art, beaming in excitement. That last bit was terrific. I mean, I heard that Sylvie was a dragon from the students who were at school when we were attacked, but... The prince gazed wistfully between Sylvie and Art, then stepped forward to wave at the captivated mass roaring their names. After several minutes of receiving the crowd's cheers, they headed back into the castle. As Art slowly retreated, he saw Tess striding off, heading for the teleportation gate without a word to any of them. I take it that Tessia is still mad at me? Art asked Virion, who was walking alongside him. Mad? Frustrated? Annoyed? Offended? I'm not sure which, but I do know that whatever she's feeling towards you, it isn't good, he said, holding back a chuckle. Now, I'm sure you have some things to take care of with your family, but I need you back at the castle as soon as you're done. I'll be back as soon as I send my parents off, but I'm still not sure whether it'd be best to keep my sister here or have her go with my parents, Art said. There are quite a few mothers and children who are going to be in the castle. Some of them are even teachers at magic academies, so it might be beneficial for her to stay, but only if she's okay with being separated from you and your parents, he noted. Yeah, you have a point. I'll try to convince her. Virion nodded as he delved into the inside pocket of his robe. There's one last thing you need to think about. He withdrew his hand and extended it towards Art, revealing a black coin the size of his palm. The coin glimmered with the slightest movement, intricate engravings etched all over its surface, catching Art's eye. This is one of the artifacts that were handed down to me. I had given them both to my son when I resigned from the throne, but after Alea's death, he gave this one back to me, saying I should choose the next lance. Art stood there silently for a moment, mesmerized by the oval coin that seemed to pulse in Virion's hand. So this is the artifact Alea had? Yes. Bonding it with your blood and mine will trigger it, giving you the boost that allowed all the other lances to break into the white stage. I know you're not an elf, but I'd be honored if you'd serve as a lance under me. His hands twitched, tempted to accept the gift that could enhance his chances against the four scythes and their retainers. But he shook his head with a resigned shrug. I'll fight for you even without this bond, but I can't accept it. I may regret this, but it doesn't feel right for me to cheat my way into the white stage. I'll get there on my own. Good choice, a familiar hoarse voice chimed in from behind him. He glanced over his shoulder to see the purple-eyed Asura walking over, arms behind his back. Lord Aldir, Virion greeted with a curt bow, his palm still extended with the artifact. Aldir lifted the coin from Virion's hand and studied it. While this artifact may give you a tremendous boost in strength, it also greatly inhibits the potential to grow further. The Asura tossed the coin back to Virion as he continued speaking. Normally, I'd recommend that any lessers take the opportunity to use it, especially in these dangerous times. But Arthur, you're a different case. Your talent aside, Lady Sylvie's dragon blood courses through your veins and the powerful will of her mother inside your mana core. It may be a disadvantage during the war, but I'd suggest you don't take it. Thank you for the heads up, Art replied. Glancing around, he noticed that while Blaine and Priscilla Glader remained, Curtis and Cathilyn had left, along with Tess and her parents. Are you heading back to the castle right now as well? Art asked Virion. Virion nodded solemnly. There's much to prepare for. Blaine and Priscilla, with the help of their lances, will prepare the city in the meantime. We won't know where exactly they'll land or how spread out they're going to be, but it's vital that we protect the city. Fortunately, the ships are still a few days away. I understand. I'll meet you as soon as I've taken care of everything here. Virion and Aldir prepared to go through the teleportation gate, but then the white-haired Asura turned back, meeting Art's gaze with his single purple eye. Arthur, are you ready for this war? No, Art replied honestly, but I don't plan on losing to those damn Vritra. Aldir smiled. Good. That's what I like to hear. Virian and Alder headed back to the castle, while Art stayed behind to see his mother and father off. They were insistent about rejoining the Twin Horns and helping out in the war. As they said their goodbyes, Art tried to dissuade them from going near the western shore where the fighting would be the heaviest, but they were adamant. As frustrated as Art was, he couldn't blame them. For him, there may have been a certain amount of detachment, despite growing up here, since he remembered his previous life. He considered Dicathan his home because this was where his family was, which was a large factor as to why he decided to fight against the Vritra. But for his parents, this land was truly their home. Protecting it was only natural. After they'd gone, Art removed the last of his armor, sank into his seat, and let out a deep breath. "Damn it," he cursed, rubbing his temples. "Getting into an argument with them wasn't the best way to part," Sylvie said, lying down with her head on her paws on the polished tea table. "Thank you for enlightening me." Art rolled his eyes. "I just don't understand why they wouldn't listen to my advice. I didn't say anything wrong." "You basically told them to go off into some remote area and stay hidden," she replied. "Those were not the words I used," he retorted, kicking off his boots. "But that's what you meant." "I just want them to stay safe," Art murmured, conceding her point. Sylvie hopped off the tea table and onto the armrest of his chair. If your parents were concerned about their own safety, they wouldn't have joined the war. Well, I'm more concerned about my family's safety than this war. I'm thankful that they're at least leaving Ellie behind, but that doesn't mean they should just go out risking their lives. Sylvie nodded. "I know. I just hope they understand that my concern comes from being their son, not from some..." Art's voice trailed off as he sighed deeply. "It's going to be hard for them to discern now that they know," Sylvie said softly, placing a comforting paw on his arm. Art sank lower into his seat and stared at Sylvie for a moment. "When exactly did you figure out what I was, anyway?" "I think I've always known, but I just could never come up with the term to describe it. We do share thoughts, after all." "Every thought?" Art asked, stunned. "Mm-hmm. But you only answered when I spoke directly to you. And I don't hear your thoughts unless you're speaking directly to my mind. For me, speaking to your mind is much like speaking out loud. I've learned to keep some thoughts hidden. I can't say the same for you, though," she giggled. Art's eyes grew wide in horror. "That means..." Sylvie grinned. "Do I know about your constant emotional turmoil when it comes to Tessia?" "Yup," Art groaned. "Don't worry. I've listened to all your fleeting thoughts since I was born. I didn't start understanding until a bit later, but I've grown used to it over the years," she said consolingly, her sharp teeth still showing as her grin remained. "Well, I haven't grown used to anything at all," Art grumbled. Sylvie's grin faded as she stared at him with her bright yellow eyes. "We're going to battle soon. Grandfather told me during training that, while I'm far from reaching the level of a true Asura, his blood still runs through me. This means that though I can fight alongside you in this war, I'm not invincible. The best way to stay alive is to rely on each other." "Of course," Art said, a bit confused. What had brought this on? "I'm saying this because there are things that I've hidden from you, things I've just found out recently, and I feel like you're the only one I can trust with my life," she said, reading his mind. "Sylv, you know you can trust me with whatever it is. I've raised you since you were born, after all." "Thank you." Sylvie hopped off the armrest and onto his seat, resting her head on his lap. There was a moment of silence as Art pondered what she had said. He knew she could read his thoughts, but, as she mentioned, it really didn't matter. As curious as he was, he didn't bother asking her what these things were that she had found out. She would have already told him if she wanted to. What worried him was the fact that this was the first time she had expressed any sort of fear for her life. Despite their numerous encounters with dangerous situations, she had always remained strong and fearless. But now, he could feel her apprehension toward this war. He gently stroked Sylvie's soft head. "How did you get so smart anyway? It seems like ever since coming back from Epheotis, you've grown at a remarkable rate. And don't get me started on your growing ego. You're just bitter because you're taking life advice from a fox younger than you. And I've always been a fast learner. Why do you think I always stayed on top of your head? So, you were learning by observing our surroundings? He asked. Yup. It helps that you know a lot, and that I have free access to your thoughts, Sylvie confirmed as she nestled in closer to Art's leg. He could tell she was tired. Although he had 1,000 questions about her sudden apparent change in demeanor, he knew he had to wait. Art watched his bond as she slept soundly, her breathing steady. She hadn't really changed much. There was still a sense of immaturity in her voice despite the change in the way she spoke. It felt like she was forcing herself to become more mature. He wasn't sure what Lord Indrath had drilled into her while training her, but one thing was for sure. She had become aware that she was an Asura. As Sylvie's breathing became slower and more rhythmic, Art leaned his head back on the chair, staring up at the ceiling of his room while he organized his thoughts. Virian and the others didn't know this, but Winsome had told Art what Agrona and his clan were like. He and the rest of the Vritra had been experimenting on what the Asuras called lesser races, even before they had escaped to Alakria. From what he'd heard, the first mages to appear at the wall weren't anything special, but it was likely that they were simply cannon fodder, meant to create mayhem and divide their forces with the mana beasts under their control. If what Winsome said was true, then the horde of ships approaching their shores would include mages with Asura blood coursing through their veins. And they'd had centuries to explore that bond. Art could only imagine how much they had progressed since then and what they would do to the people of Dicathan if the Vritra won this siege. This place could become a breeding ground for soldiers, which Agrona would use to conquer Epheotis. Arthur! The hoarse baritone voice snapped Art out of his thoughts. Isn't there some sort of etiquette about knocking when entering someone's room, or at least using the door? The tone of your response tells me things didn't go well with the business you had to take care of, Aldir said as he calmly took a seat on the couch across from Art. Why are you here? I thought you would be with the council, Art said, ignoring his comment. There is something I need from you, Aldir replied, his piercing gaze directed at Art. Art stared back, unwavering. And what is that? There was a tense silence. Then Aldir sighed. Your help, he admitted. Lord Indrath told me to rely on your judgment throughout the course of this war. And after your speech earlier, I think I understand why. What did he mean by rely on my judgment? Art asked. Sylvie stirred awake as he sat up, but drifted back to sleep almost immediately. Lord Indrath realized that your contribution to this war shouldn't be limited to just being a sword. While there will be times when you'll be needed in the field, sending you out to every battle will only tire you out. When you aren't absolutely needed, you'll be by my side in the council, strategizing with us and giving us your input. Let me get this straight. You want a 16-year-old making life-changing decisions with the council? Art scoffed. Aside from the fact that you are just a lesser, you're not a normal child. Don't think that this eye is just a pretty decoration. I knew there was something different about you the first time we met, but only by Lord Indrath's words did I realize just how much. Is there something I get in return for helping you? Art asked, resting his head on his hand. Aldir's eye narrowed. I came in good faith to ask for your help, but it benefits us both if you cooperate. Losing this war means dying, being enslaved, or worse. Not just for you, but for your loved ones as well. You could have at least thrown me a bone, Art said, smiling at Aldir's seriousness. Yeah, I'll help, but I'm not sure how much of my advice the council is willing to listen to. Virian might listen, but everyone else... Let me worry about that, Aldir replied. Besides, you won't only be in meetings. I have other plans for you as well. When you say other plans like that, it sounds kind of ominous. As I said, you are a powerhouse in this war, maybe more so than the Lances given a few years. I would certainly not waste your abilities by having you do nothing but sit and listen to those lessers, I mean the council, bicker with one another. Art shook his head with a helpless laugh. It must be frustrating for you, being here and restrained from helping despite the amount of manpower you could provide just by yourself. My time will come. If we defend against this siege successfully, then, with the help of the Dikathan army, our Asuras will be able to take care of Agrona and his weakened force. It seems like this war is far from over, Art said, absent-mindedly brushing his fingertips across Sylvie's back, drawing comfort from her sleeping form. Yes, but this fight will be the start of a new era. If Dikathan wins and fights alongside us Asuras, Agrona and his clan of traitors and mutts will fall, and we will all gain access to a new continent. Aldir sounded hopeful, almost excited, despite his usual calm demeanor. You've lost someone to Agrona, haven't you? Art asked, seeing the expression on the Asura's face. Many of us lost loved ones in that battle. No, it would be better described as a massacre, Aldir answered, the brow underneath his third eye twitching. Well, you heard what I told Virion. I have no intentions of losing this war, but if you're going to ask my help in this, you need to trust in the advice that I do give. Laughing through his nose, Aldir replied, Never in all my years would I have imagined a lesser would speak to me like this. Well, these lessers are fighting your battles for you, so at least have the decency to call them by the names of their actual race, Art replied. You ask for a lot, Arthur Leywin, but very well. The white-haired Asura stood up, smoothing out the creases in his ivory robe. It's about time I headed back down to the meeting room. It worries me every time I leave those people alone for too long. We will be expecting you shortly. Sure, I'll be down soon, but I'm curious about something. What is it? The Asura replied, looking back over his shoulder. The 2 remaining lances who couldn't join us today. I know you said 2 years ago that they're working under you, but you didn't kill them or anything, right? Aldir shook his head. Even I wouldn't be so rash as to kill a lance on a whim. While political envoys can be replaced, a lance's power can take years to develop, even if they have a particularly high compatibility with the artifact. I had planned on bringing up the subject at the meeting, but since you mentioned it, I'd like your input on this matter. Art nodded eagerly as the Asura revealed his plan for the 2 missing lances. Then an idea struck him. He let out a devious laugh and grinned wickedly at Aldir. Not bad, but I have a better idea. Wrapped tightly in his woolen cloak, Art trudged towards the bustling encampment, each exhale forming a cloud of frosty fog in the chilly air. Nestled beneath a cliff beside the shore, the soldiers had erected their tents and kindled fires shielded behind a massive rock formation that rose over 20 feet high. From a distance, the soft glow of flickering flames and wisps of smoke could be seen, while the towering wall of boulders provided a natural barrier against any threats approaching from the sea. Peering through the dense haze enveloping the beach, Art could just discern a few sentries stationed atop the cliff, their forms obscured by the swirling mist. He tightened his cloak and layered himself in another shield of mana, warding off the biting winter winds as he approached the encampment. We're almost there, Art informed Sylvie, who had nestled deep within the layers of his clothes. His bond peeked her head out, grumbled sourly, and promptly retreated back inside his cloak. For such a mighty being, you're surprisingly sensitive to the cold, he teased, pressing on with the last leg of their trek. You're not the one who had to fly through that cursed wind. It feels like my wings have holes in them even in this form, Sylvie complained. And I'm not weak to the cold, I just hate it. Art chuckled softly and quickened his pace. They had declined a truce with Alakria, so Aldir couldn't risk creating teleportation gates anymore. This left Sylvie as their only means of long-distance travel, where gates didn't exist. He had her transform just a mile back to avoid drawing attention. Virion had requested that Art stay with this division, prepared to assist in case Alakrian ships ventured this far down the coast. However, Art had added another item to his agenda without Virion's knowledge. Walking along the base of the cliff, Art concealed his presence expertly. Unlike most mages who simply nullified their mana, his training in Ephiatus had honed his ability to maintain a delicate balance of mana output through his channels and input through his veins. This allowed him to evade detection even from vigilant mana beasts, while retaining the ability to wield mana. He noticed a conspicuously large tent with a peaked roof positioned near the cliff's base, where the boulders formed a natural barricade. Given its location in the safest part of the semicircular encampment and its size, 3 times larger than any other nearby tents, Art inferred it belonged to the captain. Approaching the camp's edge, he casually picked up some broken pieces of wood and proceeded among the resting soldiers. No one paid him much heed. With his hood drawn up and arms full of branches and twigs, he appeared like any earnest young soldier, eager to make a contribution to the war effort. As Art ventured further into the encampment, he encountered a diverse array of soldiers preparing for battle. Seasoned warriors meticulously polished their weapons and armor under the meager light of the fires, casting brief glances in his direction without much interest. Nearby, a group of younger soldiers, adorned in elaborate gear and wielding flashy staffs, sneered at Art's plain attire, their disdain evident. Sylvie, observing their expressions, hissed her disapproval. Those ignorant clowns have no idea who they're scoffing at. They'd be better used as bait. Easy there, Art soothed, amused. You sure picked up some colorful insults from Lord Indrath. Continuing deeper into the encampment, Art passed by the bustling cooking station. Large fires blazed in earthen pits created by magic, around which cooks prepared meals. Pots filled with stew bubbled invitingly, while sturdy men carved chunks of meat. A commanding voice cut through the activity. Clear the pots for the skewered meat. Benfir and Shren, get ready to start handing out the stew. It was a small-framed woman with a fierce expression, wielding a ladle like a weapon rather than a tool, who barked orders. As Art walked past, the woman glanced over her shoulder and gave him a respectful nod. He was taken aback. He hadn't expected anyone to recognize him this far from civilization. Approaching the large tent in the farthest corner of the camp, Art was drawn to the high-pitched clash of metal on metal. Setting aside the branches he carried, he observed a circle of soldiers gathered around 2 augmenters engaged in a friendly bout. Their weapons emitted sparks despite the mana covering their blades, each demonstrating skillful parries and strikes. "You've gotten better, Cedri," remarked the short-haired soldier. He appeared slightly shorter than Art, yet his arms seemed unusually long. Utilizing his slender frame and elongated limbs, he delivered swift, erratic strikes with dual daggers. "And yet, you're still a pain to fight against, Jonah," Cedri retorted confidently, evading Jonah's swipe. She fought at a disadvantage, using heavy gauntlets in close combat against an opponent who excelled in long-range attacks, but she held her ground without yielding. She deftly ducked, weaved, and parried Jonah's dual-wielding assault, capturing Art's interest in her skills. Something about her caught his attention, and upon closer observation of her ears, he realized what it was. "She's a half-elf," Art pointed out to Sylvie, who had lost interest in the match and retreated back inside his cloak. At his observation, Sylvie peeked her head out again. "Oh, she is. We haven't come across one other than that ill-tempered Lucas." "Ill-tempered is putting it lightly," Art chuckled, his focus still on the duel. "Shouldn't we notify the captain of our arrival?" Sylvie reminded him. "You're right. I got sidetracked," Art thought, turning away from the duel. "You always do when it comes to these kinds of fights," Sylvie teased. "There's something about close combat that makes a fight exciting, unlike long-range conjuring," Art agreed, walking back. When they reached the large white tent, Art was stopped by an armored guard gripping a halberd. "What business do you have in here?" the guard demanded, his gaze unyielding as Art stood before him with his hood covering half his face. "Is this the captain's tent?" Art asked calmly, exhaling deeply as he did so. "I said, what business do you have in here?" the guard repeated, his tone firm and unwavering. Without a word, Art held out a medallion. As the guard caught sight of it, his narrow eyes widened in shock. His gaze shifted from the gold medallion back to Art with a look of horror at the blunder he had made. I'm so sorry, Shh, Art mouthed, cutting off the guard before he could finish speaking. He held up a hand. I don't want my visit to cause a stir, so let's just keep this between us." "Yes, sir," the guard stammered, nodding vigorously as he opened the flap to allow Art entrance. Stepping into the spacious tent, Art felt a rush of warmth envelop his body. He shrugged off his cloak, feeling as if a layer of ice was melting from his face. His attention was immediately drawn to the flare hawk perched near the entrance. "I remember her," Sylvie chimed in his head as she hopped to the ground. Art turned to the woman seated behind a small wooden desk, who seemed unfazed by his sudden appearance. "Professor Glory," he greeted her, offering a faint grin. She finally looked up, her face lighting up at the sight of her old student. His former team fighting mechanics professor appeared unchanged, with her tanned complexion and brown hair tightly tied back. Despite being indoors, she wore light armor, and her two giant swords leaned against a drawer behind her. "It's good to see you, General Leywin," she said warmly, coming around her desk. "Professor Glory," he greeted her, offering a faint grin. She finally looked up, her face lighting up at the sight of her old student. His former team fighting mechanics professor appeared unchanged, with her tanned complexion and brown hair tightly tied back. Despite being indoors, she wore light armor, and her two giant swords leaned against a drawer behind her. "It's good to see you, General Leywin," she said warmly, coming around her desk. "Please, just call me Arthur," he said, feeling a bit helpless. "Then I'd prefer if you just called me Vanazy," she replied, spreading out her arms. "After all, I'm not your professor anymore." Accepting her hug, Art realized it was the first time he'd heard Professor Glory's first name. When she released him from her firm grasp, he said, "Well then, do you mind giving me a brief report of the situation here, Vanazy?" Vanazy acknowledged Sylvie with a polite nod before reaching behind her desk. After a moment of rummaging, she held out a rolled-up parchment but started speaking before Art could open it. "Right now, it's just me and my division of 3,000 soldiers. My division is on the smaller side, but we have with us 58 mages, 20 of whom are conjurers and 10 are long-range augmenters, to make up for the numbers," she recited. Art nodded in understanding as he skimmed through the parchment. "There's supposed to be one other captain along with you, right?" "Captain Otter and his division are making the march up here from Maber City. I can send out a transmission if you'd like," she answered. "No need. Truth be told, I'm not even expecting any ships to veer off this far south," Art admitted, handing Vanazy back the parchment. "I heard about your big plan set up for those Alacrian bastards up the coast," she said, eyeing him. "You think it's going to work?" "It'll slow them down, and with any luck, sink a few of their ships." "A shame we won't be there to see it," she said regretfully. The bright-eyed professor, whom Art had fought next to down at Widow's Crypt, removed a leather flask from her drawer, pulling out the cork with her teeth before gulping down what he assumed was alcohol. "Care for a swig, General Leywin?" She winked, holding the flask up. "I'm a minor, you know." Vanazy scoffed. "If you're old enough to go to war, you're old enough to drink." Art grabbed her flask and took a gulp. The smoky liquid seared his throat as it made its way into his stomach, warming up his insides. "Is it smart to inhibit yourself like this before a battle?" Sylvie asked, her tone disapproving. "Relax, it's just one sip," Art replied. Stifling a cough, he handed the leather bottle back. "That's got quite the kick." "Mm-hmm," Venezi agreed. "Although you're going to need a bit more than that to keep yourself warm out there. Aren't you freezing in that outfit?" Art looked down at his attire. While he wasn't expecting a battle, he was dressed for one. His inner gray garment was skin-tight, with sleeves reaching to his wrists. Thin and elastic enough for freedom of movement, it was also sturdy against sharp edges to a certain degree. Over this, he wore a simple black tunic that draped loosely over his shoulders, its sleeves stopping at the elbows for unhindered arm movement. He shook his head. "I've grown used to constantly surrounding myself with mana to keep warm. Honestly, even the cloak is just for appearance's sake." "Well, I'm glad you're here. Commander Virion wanted me to have you speak in front of the soldiers, for motivation." "About that," Art grinned. "Let's hold off on that until Captain Otter arrives. I was hoping to have a little fun in the camp." "Uh-oh," Venezi groaned. "What are you up to?" Art shook his head disapprovingly. "Now, is that any way to speak to your superior?" "Fine," she relented. "Just don't mortally wound any of my soldiers." "What kind of person do you take me for?" Art replied innocently, pulling his cloak back on as he headed toward the cloth door. "Are there any soldiers who'd recognize me?" he asked, recalling how the head chef had bowed to him. "We're pretty far out from any sort of mass communication. I just had a letter delivered by carrier with the latest updates, but I haven't announced any of it," she answered. "With your shaggy hair and those plain clothes, you'll easily pass as a new recruit picked up from the countryside." "There's an old saying that a wise man appears weak when he is strong, and strong when he is weak," Art remarked, pointing at the dazzling armor she wore, engraved with intricate decorations. "It's for protection, not for showing off," she argued. "Not when the design on the armor matches your bond's armor," he teased, glancing at the silver armor hanging on a stand next to Torch. "You've turned into a wise ass since they made you a lance," she grumbled. "Oh, please, I was a wise ass long before becoming a lance," Art rebutted. Venezi leaned back against her desk and gazed past Art, as if looking far into the distance. "Appear weak when you're strong. I like that." "Feel free to steal it," Art said as he headed out of the tent. He couldn't tell her that the quote was from an ancient general from his previous life, but she didn't seem curious about its origin. "What did you want to do?" Sylvie asked curiously, as she nestled on top of Art's head. "Evaluate the current level of our soldiers' competency, of course." Sylvie's sense of doubt flooded Art's mind. "You mean play fight with them?" "Just for a little bit. Even as your bond, I sometimes find myself worried that the fate of this continent relies so heavily upon you," Sylvie remarked. Lifting the tent flap, Art caught sight of the guard stationed outside. As soon as their eyes met, the guard's giant body stiffened into a salute. "Jen..." "Remember," Art said, winking at the guard as he pressed his finger to his lips. Without waiting for a response, he made his way back to the growing cluster of soldiers, who were cheering louder than before. The fight between the half-elf girl Cedri and the long-armed Jonah seemed to have come to an end, and a new pair of fighters now brawled on an earthen platform conjured by one of the mages. The two soldiers' casual spar had escalated into a full-blown event, and the audience moved logs and tree stumps to make seats. Some of the more enthusiastic members of the crowd were making wagers with their peers, from the meat slices of their next meals to more precious resources like the alcohol they had smuggled into camp inside hidden water pouches. All in all, there was a jubilant atmosphere in the camp, unbefitting the continent's current circumstances. Blending into the crowd, Art made his way toward the front of the makeshift arena, where he found Cedri and Jonah watching from the ground. "It was a good fight," he remarked, taking a seat next to Jonah, the dagger-wielding soldier. "Who ended up winning?" "The half-elf who fought using gauntlets," just like Art's father, gave him a victorious smile as she raised her hand, flaunting her victory in front of Jonah. Jonah ran a hand through his short, disheveled hair in frustration. "One time, Cedri. You've won one time." "The first victory of many to come," Cedri snickered. Art nodded to Cedri in acknowledgement of her success. "I wish I could have seen how it ended." Laughing, Jonah stuck out a hand. "My name's Jonah, and this immature girl next to me is Cedri. I don't think I've seen you around. Are you a new recruit?" "I guess you could say that." Art shook both their hands. "You can call me Arthur." "Well, Arthur, judging by how things are going, we should be able to enjoy a lot more fights tonight," Jonah said, returning his focus to the ongoing fight. It ended nearly as soon as it began, with a large, bear-like augmenter landing a finishing blow on his light-footed opponent. As the defeated soldier jumped off the stage, nursing his stricken cheek, Art's gaze turned back to Jonah and Cedri. Jonah's features were ordinary, with sharp angles and a slight beaked nose. Cedri, on the other hand, stood out more. With her radiant gaze that seemed full of life and her playful demeanor, Art wouldn't be surprised if she was popular with both men and women. Just in the short time he'd sat down next to them, at least a dozen of her peers had walked by, making jokes or congratulating her on her win. "Country bumpkin, get your head out of your ass!" a loud, gritty voice snapped. Art turned toward the source of the voice to see the bear-like augmenter staring back down at him. Art looked around, initially unsure who Herrick was addressing until he realized it was directed at him. "Do I really look like I came from the countryside?" he asked Jonah. "Stop going after fresh recruits, Herrick, and grow the balls to at least spar with someone in your own weight class," Cedri hissed at him, prompting laughter from the rest of the onlookers. Art stood up. "It's okay, we're just having fun, right?" "Yeah," the balding Herrick quickly agreed. "I'm using this time to show the new recruits some pointers." Removing his cloak with Sylvie nestled inside, Art ascended the elevated stage and extended his hand. "Well then, please give me lots of pointers." Herrick seized Art's hand, squeezing it a little too firmly for a friendly gesture. "I'll give you the first move." Releasing his grip, Herrick spread his arms wide, a smug grin plastered on his greasy face as he glanced towards a group of women seated in the audience. Observing Herrick's physique, Art noted that while his body seemed somewhat round for battle efficiency, the mana surrounding him indicated his competence as a mage. Curious to observe his fighting style, Art infused only a modest amount of mana into his body before stepping in to initiate his attack. As his fist closed in on Herrick's abdomen, Art noticed mana gathering where his blow would land. The towering augmenter barely reacted as Art's fist connected with his hefty stomach. "You're going to have to try harder than that, country brat," Herrick grunted as Art withdrew his hand. Art shook his hand, feeling the impact. "So strong. Now, let me show you some pointers." Herrick's smile widened as he glanced once more at the group of women watching them. He swung a massive hand to knock Art off the platform. Taking the hit, Art landed on his rear with a hint of embarrassment, but no real harm. "Oh man, I couldn't even react." Irritation flashed across Herrick's face as Art remained seated on the platform. "You're lucky I held back, or you would have gone flying. Those Alacrian bastards aren't going to go easy on you, though." "You're right. Thank you." Art tried to sound enthusiastic, playing the part of a country recruit now integrated into a mage-filled military of noble lineage, but the act was growing wearisome. The bout continued for several minutes, Herrick attempting to swat Art out of the arena with his bulky hands. Each time, Art feigned taking the full force of the attack, only to stumble a few paces away. "Come on, Herrick, I know you're taking it easy on him, but don't baby him all day," shouted a soldier, echoed by his comrades. "I just don't want to hurt the twig, you know?" Herrick replied, his frustration evident. Observing Herrick's calloused hands and his natural arm movements, Art deduced he favored a heavy axe as his primary weapon. Besides basic body strengthening, Herrick seemed devoid of any other combat tricks. Concluding his assessment, Art seized his opportunity when Herrick reached out to grab him. Twisting his body, Art flipped Herrick over his shoulder and out of the arena in one fluid motion. The maneuver appeared almost accidental, and even Herrick looked up in surprise from the ground. "Wait! I tripped!" he protested, frantically gesturing and looking around. "That shouldn't count." The crowd erupted in laughter and taunts, mockingly booing Herrick as he stomped off, muttering curses under his breath. Even using only 10% of his mana and refraining from elemental spells, Art found Herrick to be a joke. However, he kept his thoughts to himself. "Well, looks like luck's on my side," Art remarked humbly from the stage, scratching his cheek. "I was hoping to take down Herrick's big behind, but I guess I'll have to settle for you," a tall woman with tightly tied black hair announced as she leaped onto the stage. "Let's see if you really were just lucky, Greenhorn." "Please take it easy on me," Art replied, trying to placate her. His opponent stood well over 6 feet tall, a few inches taller than Art. Despite her height, her slender, muscular build gave her an imposing presence. With dark skin, sharp eyes, and straight black hair, she resembled a panther poised to strike. "I'm used to wielding a staff, so I'd prefer if you used a weapon too," she stated, conjuring a wooden staff from a ring on her finger. The ring's craftsmanship and the richness of her attire hinted at her noble status, though she seemed unconcerned with such distinctions. "Don't kill the kid, Nifia," her friend cried out with genuine concern. Art managed a nervous chuckle. "Sorry, my sword's in the smith's hands right now, but I could—" "Get him a sword his size," Nifia snapped impatiently, stretching her neck. Almost immediately, an unfamiliar soldier tossed Art a short sword still in its sheath. He carefully drew the blade and imbued it with mana to blunt its edges. Unlike Herrick, Art's new opponent remained vigilant. She dropped into a low stance, holding her wooden staff with its tip aimed at the ground, her feline eyes locked onto him. "Poor boy getting marked by Nifia," someone muttered behind Art. Art took his stance, intending to use the casual event to gauge the soldier's abilities, but the dark-skinned augmenter had different plans. "Are you ready?" he asked. She let out an irritated scoff, as if offended by his question. "Are you ready?" she retorted sharply. Art nodded in response. Without warning, she moved like lightning. Her body remained low as she lunged forward, her staff poised to strike high or low. Opting for a low attack, the base of her staff whistled toward Art's chin. He swiftly parried the blow with his short sword, the clash of metal echoing briefly. Stepping back, he shifted into a defensive posture. From the first strike, Art discerned Nifia's fighting style. Her mana control was superior to Herrick's, yet her lack of experience was evident. Her attacks were swift but predictable, likely honed against less aggressive opponents. This shortcoming fueled her frustration and inflated confidence. Art managed to parry or evade each of Nifia's strikes, though barely. To onlookers, it appeared he was being pushed back as he struggled to keep pace with her relentless assault. Nifia's temper flared with each unsuccessful attempt to land a blow. With his back foot teetering on the edge of the platform, Art used Nifia's emotional thrust to redirect her momentum, attempting to push her out of bounds to end the match. However, Nifia maintained her balance with the aid of her staff. Bounding back to the center, Nifia shook her head defiantly. "Not this time. Amber, raise a cage around the arena." "This is just a friendly competition, not a death match," Art argued, his tone firm as he addressed Nifia. She shook her head, dismissing his words. "No, this is practice for the war that's right in front of our noses. And in war, there are no out-of-bounds." Nifia turned sharply to her companion. "Amber, the cage." Without hesitation, Amber complied, raising an earthen gate around the arena with a brief chant and a wave of her wand. The barrier confined Art with Nifia, who seemed intent on proving herself like a ferocious tiger. Glancing around, Art noticed concerned glances exchanged among the soldiers, but none spoke up. He regretted his decision to blend in. The situation was escalating beyond his control. The temptation to dismantle the arena and leave crossed his mind, but he restrained himself. Drawing from his experience in a past life, Art recognized how people tended to rely on powerful allies, expecting easy victories. Whether that dynamic held true here was uncertain. The presence of a lance like himself might inspire confidence and boost morale, or breed complacency. Given the imminent threat of Alacrian ships, Art couldn't afford to gamble on uncertain outcomes. "You make a good point," Art said with a forced smile, maintaining his disguise. "Please, teach me what you can." With their weapons at the ready, they began once more. A real fight, especially one involving a sharp-edged weapon, took only a matter of seconds to draw to a conclusion. But with mana as abundant as it was in this world, making mistakes more forgiving than in his previous world, and fighters did little to correct their flaws. Instead, they focused on making their strengths even stronger. Even Art had succumbed to that mistake when he first came to this world. That is, until that was beaten out of him by the Asuras back in Epheotis. Nyphia charged at Art again, pretending to move left before swiftly swiping upward with the opposite end of her staff. Art dodged, catching a whiff of the oaky scent emanating from her polished staff. He countered by lifting it with his free hand, disrupting her balance. With a calculated move, he slid his foot behind hers and pushed forward. With the combined force of his enhanced body and augmented mana, Art sent Nyphia tumbling backward. The soldiers, previously tense under the conjured cage, erupted in astonished cries at the unexpected outcome. Glaring at Art with a mix of embarrassment and anger, Nyphia struggled to find her words. Before she could speak, a calm, husky voice broke through the crowd. "Mind if I join in on the fun?" "You're not joining anything, I just tripped." Nyphia's protest died in her throat as she recognized the voice. "Madame Astera, forgive me for my rudeness." Madame Astera, the head cook who had greeted Art respectfully upon his arrival, agilely hopped over the cage. Her movements made Nyphia's seem clumsy in comparison. Art bowed politely, maintaining his role. "May I have the pleasure of knowing who I'm sparring with?" "Just a simple cook," Madame Astera replied with a quick curtsy of her apron. Just a cook? Art repeated, skepticism evident in his voice. Somehow I have a hard time believing that. The head chef shrugged, untying her apron and tossing it to Nifia. Titles are merely embellishments that establish a hierarchy. So yes, I am Chef Astera. Nice to meet you. Surprised by her wisdom, Art nodded in acknowledgement. And I am Arthur. The pleasure is mine. Well then, Arthur, let's put on a show for these antsy soldiers before they start throwing a fit. Her lips curved into a confident smile as she held up the ladle in her hand. Of course. Will that be your weapon? Don't be silly. It'd be disrespectful to fight with a tool used to cook. With a hearty laugh, Madame Astera motioned to one of the soldiers at the front for his weapon. A short sword, much like the one Art was borrowing. Now do go easy on an old lady like me. With that, she vanished from view, moving at a speed no simple cook could have managed. Madame Astera reappeared in the air above Art, already poised to strike down, her handsome face glowing with savage excitement. With a quick sidestep, Art brought up his sword. Sparks flew as the edges of their blades met. Before Madame Astera's sword hit the ground, she kicked off the guard of his sword to gain distance. Infusing only a minimal amount of mana into his body and sword, Art felt his hand go numb from blocking her attack. A simple cook? He questioned. Just a simple cook, she replied with a wink, before rushing at him again. Their swords became mere blurs in the space between them as Madame Astera and Art unleashed a flurry of attacks. Madame Astera's petite body moved with a coordinated agility that would have impressed Cordry, the Asura who had trained Art. They dodged each other's strikes and swings with minimal movement. If not for the sweat pouring down their faces and necks, it might have looked as if they were missing on purpose. Art increased his mana output to 20%, but she seemed to have been holding back as well, because they remained at a stalemate. Neither of them had the luxury to speak. It took all their focus to keep up with each other's attacks, but their emotions showed on their faces. This wasn't a duel of magic, just a contest of pure mastery of the sword. Madame Astera wore an ecstatic grin on her sweaty face as she continued her relentless assault, and somewhere along the way, Art realized he was smiling as well. He countered each strike she delivered, but she flawlessly dodged until her back was against the earthen cage. He decided not to raise his mana, but instead used the field to his advantage. Dipping below her waist, he brought his sword close, in position to swing up. She had nowhere to move but to her right. Or so he thought. When she was barely an arm's length away, she kicked off the wall and propelled herself directly at him. Art quickly pivoted on his right foot, whirling just in time for her blade to whiz past his cheek. The tables had turned. Now it was his back against the wall. There's a saying, something like, even a mouse will attack when cornered, Madame Astera said, her sword raised closely in guard. Art smiled. Looks like I'm the cornered mouse now. Hence my caution, she smirked, tightening her grip on the raised sword. Why don't you stop holding back, Arthur? I think bringing any magic past basic augmentation into such an exciting duel would be disrespectful to the way of the sword, he replied. Wise words from one so young. She nodded in approval. Then shall we kick things up a notch? A surge of mana suddenly burst from her as she took a step back. The soldiers in the front row winced from the sudden thick gust of energy, while others had to lean forward to keep from toppling over in their seats. Art smiled and increased his mana output to 40%. A thick wave of mana burst out from him as well, but it was different from Madame Astera's. While her mana took the form of a sharp and chaotic gale, his manifested as a refined wave-like pulse. Madame Astera's smile faded as she looked at him in awe. Then, shaking herself out of her daze, she molded her mana into thick armor around her before lunging at him. The force of her initial step created a small crater beneath her feet, shaking the entire arena. In the span of a single breath, her sword was already inches away from his throat, and the force of her strike sent a spear of wind sailing past his neck, creating a hole in the wall behind him. Art could see why Nifia was so scared of this simple cook. After her initial strike failed, She leaped back and repositioned herself, tightening her stance like a coiled snake, ready to strike. But this time, Art was the one to strike. He dashed forward, creating no sound as he flashed beside her with his sword in mid-swing. She immediately ducked. With no time to prepare, her movement was sloppy, but the fact that she could react to his attack at all showed how keen her instincts were. She lashed out with a sharp swing before leaping back again. This time, she didn't wait for him to strike. Instead, she lunged once more. Art brought up his sword but realized midway that her stab was a feint as she dipped into a wide swing at his leg. She wanted him to jump up to dodge so she could catch him mid-air. Instead, Art brought his sword down to parry. A high-pitched ringing resounded from their blades clashing. A deep tremor rose up his arm from the impact, and then his sword shattered. For a moment, they just stood there, both winded and perhaps a little disappointed at the abrupt conclusion of their battle. Finally, Art said, "It's my loss, Chef Astera." "No, I can't accept that. It was just that your sword's quality." He shook his head. "I think it's time for dinner anyway, right?" He walked over to the soldier he had borrowed the sword from. "I'm sorry about your sword. I'll get you a new one." "What? Oh, yeah, sure. No problem." The soldier's voice trailed off as he stared at Art blankly. Noticing his awestruck expression, Art realized how quiet the camp had become. He looked around to see everyone with the same expression as the soldier in front of him, the only sound being the occasional crackle of wood coming from the fires. "You heard the boy? Move your asses or starve for the rest of the night," Madame Astera roared. "We're going all out tonight." With that, the silent crowd erupted into cheers, and the cooks began handing out plates stacked with steaming food. The atmosphere quickly turned festive as Madame Astera brought out barrels of liquor. Art spotted Venise trying to limit the amount of alcohol being passed around, but she finally gave in, taking a glass for herself. He wasn't sure it was a good idea to drink when they were supposed to be on the lookout for any stray enemy ships, but the chances of that happening were too meager to stop the soldiers from having at least one good night. With a few drinks in everyone's system, the soldiers became more outgoing. Some began singing, while others accompanied them, using a hollow log as a makeshift percussive instrument. The songs seemed like melodic tales of adventurers with no real thought put into rhythm, but it was enjoyable nonetheless, especially once Art had a few drinks in him as well. "Should a lance succumb to peer pressure and drink so much?" Sylvie berated him, choosing to stay inside his cloak for warmth. "Who says it's peer pressure?" Art replied, taking another sip and relishing the warm numbness spreading from the alcohol, and from the fire as well. "Do you mind if I join you?" Madame Astera asked, taking a seat next to him by the dancing flames, a glass of liquor in her hand. "So who exactly is Arthur?" "Not at all," Art replied. He was thankful for the chef's presence, since the curious soldiers lingering around him began dispersing as soon as she came over. "And I thought you already knew." "I knew you weren't just a normal boy." She shrugged before gulping down the rest of the liquor in her glass. Art followed suit and took another sip as well. "Then may I ask who you are?" "I told you I'm just a—" "Yeah, that simple cook answer of yours isn't going to cut it," he interrupted. She burst out with a hearty laugh that didn't match her small frame. "Fine, I'll answer, but you could have probably found out from some of the soldiers here. A lot of them were my students after all." "So you were a teacher? At Xyrus?" "Oh, please, I'd rather swallow a gallon of fire sand than teach at that school," she retorted. "I happen to have been a student there," Art replied, pretending to be offended. "Then you know how stuck up most of those kids are," she shot back. "Can't argue with that." Art felt a pang of discomfort at the recollection of some unwelcome memories, but pushed the feeling aside. "After the war with the elves, I decided to teach at Lancellor Academy," she said, gazing idly at the fire through her empty glass. "You've heard of us, right?" "Of course," Art answered, recalling his research on the once prestigious school located in Kalberg City near the center of Sappen, the legendary school for any would-be elite soldiers. "Except that after the war, there was little demand for soldiers," she sighed, fogging up her glass with her breath. More nobles wanted their children to attend Xyrus now that there is so little tension between the races. I see, Art muttered. Still, this war against the Alacrians should have brought quite a few new students to Lancelor. No offense, but what are you doing here as a chef? That's a story for another time, Madame Astera said, shaking her cup. A time with more booze. Art raised his glass. I'll take you up on that offer. Now, onto your story. What's a talent like you doing here, and why in the world did you decide to go to Xyrus with that level of skill with the sword? Because I could manage by myself with the sword. It was magic that I needed help getting better at, Art replied. Her eyes widened in surprise. No kidding. Art nodded and was about to elaborate further when the clank of armored footsteps drew his attention. General, sir. The guard who had been stationed outside Professor Glory's tent quickly covered his mouth, his eyes wide with fear as he darted glances between Art and Madame Astera. Despite the noise of the festive gathering around them, the guard's slip-up had caught everyone's attention, and heads turned to look in their direction. The guard lowered his voice in a futile attempt to correct his error. Captain Otter has arrived, and Captain Glory is nowhere to be found. Art turned back to the head chef, who was furrowing her brows in confusion. Well, there's my story. He said General, Madame Astera said, turning to the guard. You did say General, didn't you? The guard, unsure how to respond, glanced at Art questioningly. Art simply stood up, careful not to disturb Sylvie, who was sleeping in his cloak. Come on, let's go find your captain, Art said, turning back to the chef and holding up his empty glass. At a time with more booze. Madame Astera's expression softened into a smile. Aye. As they walked toward the main tent, Art scanned the tops of the large boulders, hoping to spot the captain. Knowing her, he doubted she'd be able to fully relax. There she is, Art said, squinting. The guard took a moment to locate the shadowed figure of Captain Glory, who was perched atop a boulder that formed the front wall of the encampment. Thank you, the guard said, starting in her direction. Art held him back. Let me handle it. Tell Captain Otter I'll meet with him first thing tomorrow morning. But the captain, it's fine, Art interjected, handing the guard his empty glass. There's nothing urgent going on, and I've had a bit too much alcohol to entertain a stranger tonight. Yes, General. With a salute, the guard turned and headed towards the tent. Art exhaled deeply, his breath forming a mist in the chilly air. He wrapped himself in a shroud of wind and prepared to leap. The thin layer of frost beneath his feet crunched as he pushed off the ground. Where are we headed now? Sylvie asked, sounding noticeably sleepy through their mental link. Checking that his bond was settled, Art answered wryly as he approached Venezi. She glanced over her shoulder before turning her gaze back toward the moonlit gray ocean. Want another drink? Should the lookout be drinking? Art asked, taking a seat beside her as Sylvie emerged from his woolen cloak. You're one to talk, General, with your cheeks as red as ripe tomatoes, she scoffed, idly stroking Sylvie, who had curled up between them. Give me that. Art took the flask from Venezi's hands and took another gulp of the fiery liquid that burned pleasantly down his throat. Leaning back on her hands, Venezi gazed up at the crescent moon. Do you think we'll be able to win this war? I'm not entirely sure, but I'll do everything I can to ensure we do, he promised. Somehow, despite being half my age, there's something reassuring about your words. It's as if you truly believe you can make it happen. Art reflected on the event from 3 years ago that continued to haunt him. I've let a lot of people down before. I need to make sure I don't do it again. Are you referring to what happened at Xyrus? Venezi asked, her brows furrowing with concern. He simply nodded in response, his gaze fixed on the mesmerizing expanse of the ocean. What's left of Xyrus Academy now? He could feel Venezi's eyes on him, but she remained silent. Tessia doesn't remember much, Art continued. Curtis and Cathilne act like nothing happened, as if they can't face the reality. What exactly happened before I arrived? Arthur, what's done is done. Me telling you this will only make you... I need to know, Venezi. I should have asked much earlier, but I kept making excuses. He interrupted, turning to meet her gaze. With a deep breath, Venezi nodded. In the disciplinary committee, Doradrea was the first to be found dead. Theodore was gravely injured and didn't survive, even with the aid of the Adventurers Guild's emitters. What about Fairith and Claire Bladeheart? When I arrived, she'd been stabbed. Did she survive? Venezi nodded again. Fairith Ivsar was badly injured, but he was taken home safely. As for Claire Bladeheart, the family is as secretive as they are old. I was told she was alive, but I don't know her condition. I see. At least she's alive, Art said, relieved that the leader of the disciplinary committee had survived. However, his brief sense of relief faded as Venezi continued to list names of those who were now gone. The sheer number of names was overwhelming, and although not every name was clear, the overall impact was heavy. And, he prompted, noticing her hesitation. Kai Krestless was one of the radical members associated with the Vritra, Dreneve, Venezi continued. Kai and the rest of Dreneve's robed followers vanished with him, along with Elijah. He's probably the reason Curtis avoided discussing that disaster. I see, Art muttered, turning his gaze back to the ocean. For a long moment, silence enveloped them. The distant commotion and the faint crash of the night's tide were the only sounds breaking the quiet as Art reflected on his brief time at Xyrus. Learning the full extent of what had happened gave him a chance to reflect more deeply. He often found himself forgetting the memories from his past life. His past self's influence had waned over time, allowing him to grow into the person he aspired to be in this world. Yet at this moment, he wished he could revert to his former self, the cold, rational figure who had suppressed his emotions to avoid any vulnerability that could be exploited. Although he had suspected what had occurred, hearing it confirmed made it starkly real. His chest tightened, as if the blood in his heart had thickened to tar, struggling to maintain a steady rhythm. A warm drop of liquid traced down Art's cold face, his chin quivering like an infant's. Struggling to suppress his emotions, he turned to face the camp, pondering how many of the people he knew, including those he had met today, might end up dead, despite his efforts to prevent it. He wondered how many would survive this war. Turning to Venezi, Art saw her shoulders shaking as she clutched her flask tightly. Quickly wiping away a tear, he stood up. Sylvie, keep watch for the night, he requested. Sure, Sylvie replied, her voice softer and more comforting than usual. Transforming into her original form, she startled Venezi out of her melancholy. With a powerful flap of her black wings, Sylvie soared upward, disappearing into the night sky. Art extended his hand toward Venezi. Come on, the night is still young, and it seems the soldiers have no intention of stopping. As their captain, you should join them rather than moping around up here.